Here's the countdown against our big board here in the studio as we approach 7 o'clock Eastern Time. And it's time to tell you that NBC News is projecting at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, Joe Biden will win when all the votes are counted in South Carolina. Let's remember, this is his first primary victory. Let's remember, this is only the second primary. And let's show you Biden headquarters, where we couldn't help but notice earlier that this network's coverage was on their big board. Rachel Maddow.
This is obviously what the Biden campaign was hoping for, was why they were projecting all of this confidence. I will say that it does matter that we are having a poll closing projection. The polls closed at 7. This projection of this victory is at poll closing. You can extrapolate from that this will likely be a substantial victory for Vice President Biden. And ultimately, it doesn't matter, how much you win by. If you win, he needs these bragging rights. He needs this momentum shift. But this is the thing Joe Biden needed to do tonight. He has done it. And now let the games begin in terms of figuring out what this does to the rest of the field. It will be an interesting and important race for second place and third place tonight.
It will be.
And it will be interesting. I mean, Bernie Sanders is not in South Carolina tonight. Neither is Elizabeth Warren. But watching down ticket, watching what happens with Steyer, watching what happens with Buttigieg and Warren and Klobuchar and Sanders is going to be important, because there's going to be brokerage talks right now among the rest of the field to see about what's going to happen with this front-runner status that Sanders has, that's causing so much agita and so much of the rest of the Democratic Party.
And this is arguably the most important piece of the Democratic voting constituency. I'm not a Democrat. I don't know why South Carolina goes third. They should go first.
This is the reliable vote every time, loyal Democratic base. African Americans, African American women who will dominate this vote today. So listen to these people. Joe Biden's first primary victory ever, by the way.
That's right. Out of all the times he's ever run for president, this is the first state he's ever won.
Primary.
So, Steve Kornacki, we've established the history of this, and Rachel made an important point. When we call a race at poll closing time, there is overwhelming certainty about it. Our election director is very conservative about such things for good reason. So one of the things I want to know from you is, where is this going to bring us in terms of raw vote? Where is this going to leave us in terms of delegates after tonight?
Yeah, a lot just changed in this Democratic race in the last few minutes. So let me take you through some of the most important numbers we can from this exit poll. As you say, and you will see, this is overwhelming what we're looking at. We have talked for so long about South Carolina being the first test of the black vote. Here you go. 60% for Joe Biden among African Americans in South Carolina. Remember, an outright majority of this electorate today is African American. Biden wins 60% of it. Sanders all the way back at 17%, barely ahead of Tom Steyer, who's at 14% among black voters. Everybody else there in single digits. Significantly, if you think back to 2016, if you remember the South Carolina primary, Bernie Sanders got clobbered. He got clobbered, especially because of black voters. He got 14% of the black vote in 2016. Tonight, he has moved that up to just 17%. So that's the single most important factor here. By the way, we have talked about Sanders overall in national polls being very popular with Democratic voters, 70, 75%, numbers like this. How about this? Black voters in South Carolina, their opinion of Bernie Sanders, much more mixed. 56% favorable, 36% unfavorable. He's not unpopular, but compare that 36% favorable, unfavorable rating among black voters to Joe Biden. 85-11. So Joe Biden just absolutely destroying Bernie Sanders with black voters. Black voters, an outright majority of this electorate. That's the recipe for a landslide in South Carolina. We can talk about this later. That has big implications for what's to come Tuesday and beyond, potentially, with the black vote. And one other note, you mentioned the delegates. There are 54 delegates, Brian, that are up for grabs here in South Carolina tonight. You can see that right here. What has happened, and it's not been updated here yet, I was hoping it would be, our decision desk right now is confident that at least 20 of those 54, when all is said and done, will go to Joe Biden. So that will move him to 35 at least Nobody else at this point, our decision desk is confident, will get delegates out of South Carolina. So that Biden number is going to grow as the night goes on. You can see he has already moved past Pete Buttigieg. He will continue to move past Pete Buttigieg. There are still 34 more delegates from South Carolina to be allocated. But just with that projection and the overwhelming scale of it, our decision desk is confident that Biden will get at least 20 delegates here. And already he's in second place about 2 minutes after polls closed.
All right. Steve Kornacki at the board. So, David Plouffe, what just happened to the Democratic race?
Well, I think this is a two-person race right now. There's only two people that I think are going to accept our party's nomination. It's either Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden. Now, I talked to some Biden officials today, and they said even if they did as well as they could tonight, which looks like they could, and they leveraged that as well as they could between now and Tuesday, they still fully expect Bernie Sanders to exit Super Tuesday with a pretty significant delegate lead. So in order for that delegate lead, I think, to get closer, you're going to have a lot of the candidates drop out, either between now and Tuesday or right after Tuesday. Joe Biden's going to have to run a great campaign because that requires him on March 10th and 17th and 24th and later in April then to actually beat Bernie Sanders by some margin, so that, as we see in South Carolina tonight, the only way you net delegates in a significant way is to beat your opponent handily. So the question really will be, and then you've got Bloomberg. So Biden is going to be, I think, really harmed on Tuesday because Bloomberg is going to take votes and delegates. Not all of that would have gone to Biden, but I think it's fair to say a lot of it would. So, Joe Biden escaped his political obituary tonight. He's going to have a big win. I think he goes from someone we were wondering a couple weeks ago, would he make it till March, to now I think being Bernie Sanders' main contender. But he's now got to fully leverage this. And Rachel's right. He's got to have the political skill to talk to some of the other candidates. He's got to raise resources. He's got to perform better than he's performed in the campaign to date. And I think the superdelegates and other party leaders are going to have to come out. If they believe Joe Biden is the best candidate, it's much better to do that now, in my view, than wait till Milwaukee at the convention and say, now we've decided, that we think Joe Biden's best. Make your case now.
David, what are the conversations like between campaigns when they happen at moments like this in the race? I mean, who calls? Is it the candidate? Is it staff to staff? Is it campaign manager to campaign manager? Is there bargaining? Is it friendly? Is it like an auction? I mean, how does it go?
Well, there's all that, although let's be honest. So it's not like anybody else in the field has a bunch of delegates to say, hey, Joe Biden, if I get out, will you make me your VP because I got all my delegates? So I think at the end of the day, there'll be conversations at the candidate level, at the staff level. But 90% of this, really, to be honest, isn't about anything the Biden campaign does. I mean, it's going to be about the individual candidates, Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar and Tom Steyer and Mike Bloomberg, maybe even Elizabeth Warren, taking stock and saying, what's the point of going forward? Unless you believe that you could come in third or fourth or fifth in delegates and somehow the convention will say, you know what, Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden, we're going to skip you and pick somebody who came in third, fourth, or fifth. It's not going to happen. So there'll be conversations between the candidates, between the staffs. But right now, most of this is on the people still in the race who have to make a hard decision. Now, if Joe Biden looks like somebody who can go the distance, that might give them a little more confidence. Because, again, Mike Bloomberg, Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar all have been pretty clear, as strongly as they feel like they should win. They don't think Bernie Sanders should win. And they're worried about him as a nominee.
I participate in some of these conversations. I mean, they're ugly, and there are two emotions that drive them, pride and shame. Can you make them feel some pride in being part of something that, if they agree on some policies, or if they care about something a lot, in this field, it might be climate change or something, that it will be made a central issue. The other one is shame. Telling another campaign, do you want it on you? If we're fighting amongst ourselves and not taking on the other party. I mean, and it's not really a backroom thing. I mean, you play on another campaign's pride and shame publicly in forums like this.
Ken, though, we do have this weird factor this year that we've never had before, which is that Mike Bloomberg is currently in the race. He has spent over $500 million already. Yeah. He's not competed in any of these states, but he's still this huge factor because of the ads, because of the money, because of the support that is translated to. And he has said, whoever the nominee is gets my money. Yeah. My money will run for president against Donald Trump. And Bernie Sanders says he won't take it, but all of the other candidates would. Yeah. And maybe Bernie would change his mind when it comes down to it if he ends up being the nominee. But when in those kind of calculations that David is talking about, if you are the Klobuchar campaign or the Warren campaign or the Buttigieg campaign, and you're thinking, is there any reason for me to go on? Can I really go the distance? Can I really compete? Well, if you stay in the race, you potentially could win the biggest lottery of all time by being the candidate left standing for some reason when one of the frontrunners fell and Bloomberg needed to put his money behind whoever was left.
I think we're just getting to the point where it's getting late to rack up delegates. I mean, after Tuesday, I think that just gets harder for anyone other than these two, but maybe not.
The whole raison d'etre of Bloomberg's campaign is to defeat Donald Trump. Right. I mean, and he's in because he doesn't think Bernie Sanders can do that. So it just
and
logically,
because he didn't think
if
Biden could do it. He thought that Biden wasn't
exactly.
running
He thought that Biden couldn't do it. But he's a data-driven guy, right? I mean, he's got to look at the numbers, look at where he is. The thing is, he might want to wait till after Super Tuesday, though. I mean, he may want to see what he's bought for his $500 billion since he hasn't run in a primary yet. And so that's why it's hard for me to imagine him dropping out before Super Tuesday.
But if he doesn't perform, if he doesn't have a Mike Bloomberg miracle on Super Tuesday, he is going to preclude anybody else from rising to a level where they can seriously challenge Sanders in terms of the number of delegates you need to contest the nomination.
That's the structural piece.
Yeah. And so Bloomberg's decision needs to come before Tuesday if that's going to be the way he decides. Right?
Yeah, or you could, I mean, there's a third way for the Bloomberg campaign. I mean, they could change out all that. So ads have been placed. If Biden raises gazillion, like Bloomberg-sized money tonight, he doesn't have time to buy ads. He can't buy airtime.
Right, they've already reserved their airtime, right?
But you can switch out an ad. I mean, Bloomberg could switch out. I mean, if Bloomberg's looking at legacy and having someone to choose from for Democrats other than Bernie Sanders, he could switch his paid advertising to be pro-Biden.
So keep all of his reserved ad time, but literally switch the content of the ads to say, I'm Mike Bloomberg and I want you to vote for Joe Biden.
Or just congratulations to Joe Biden on a decisive win in South Carolina. We share the same, philosophies. I mean, you can do anything with a paid message, but I think it's a more realistic question because I think you're right. He's not going to pull out before Tuesday, but he could do something with his money, his paid advertising.
He could certainly signal that, okay, but, I'm okay with Biden, and if you don't want me, I'm okay with Biden.
Right. Why would you half run for president on Super Tuesday, though? You know what I mean?
Like,
why would you
billionaires. I mean, I don't know.
Why would any of this happen?
You know what? I can answer that. I can answer that. Three reasons. One, the debates were harder than he thought they were. Yeah. Two, the stop and frisk wasn't washed away by all the African-American mayors that have endorsed him and worked with him on guns and other things. And three, Biden performed better in South Carolina than they thought.
I've got to say, anecdotally, I did not hear a lot of nice things about Mike Bloomberg in South Carolina. Now, he wasn't running there, but obviously people were aware of him and aware of his campaign and had seen some of his ads. They'd seen more of Tom Steyer's ads, frankly. But I was actually kind of surprised. I heard kind of a more negative take on Mike Bloomberg than I thought I would hear.
Mike Memley earlier tonight reported he got a straight-up victory prediction earlier today from the Biden forces. Mike is standing by to talk to us. And Mike, I'm hearing from a national Democrat who's involved in all of this. Two things. They hope they send Joe out short and sweet remarks, and they hope they make a production out of him flying overnight to somewhere that begins with maybe California, a Super Tuesday state, where he can, get some media attention for going after Tuesday.
Well, Brian, as one staffer put it to me, they actually want to let all of us say a lot of nice things about the candidate for a little while because there's been a lot of backseat driving of the Biden campaign since the earliest days. And I will say there are two things that the senior leadership of this campaign has been saying to me from the beginning. The first is that, listen, the candidate who will win the Democratic nomination is the one who can demonstrate the broadest coalition of support, especially among African-American voters. And the results tonight speak to the fact that they believe Joe Biden is that. Tomorrow, if you're wondering, he's flying to Selma, Alabama. That is a Super Tuesday state, and he'll be joining with the commemorations of the anniversary. He'll be doing other events there. The other thing they've been saying, and Andrew Yang was the math candidate, they say Joe Biden is the delegate math candidate. And the results tonight, as Rachel was saying earlier, the fact that we're able to project so quickly means Joe Biden is going to pick up an awful lot of delegates tonight, most of them, if not all of them, from the state of South Carolina. And in order to eat into Bernie Sanders' delegate advantage to this point, they need to make up that ground ground, and they're going to do it in Super Tuesday states with the highest African-American populations. If you look back to 2016, Hillary Clinton's 361 pledged delegate lead over Bernie Sanders can entirely be attributed to the 14 states with the highest concentration of African-American voters. The Biden campaign doesn't have a lot of resources. It doesn't have what the other campaigns, especially the billionaire candidates, do. But what resources they do have, they are pouring aggressively into what they call CBC districts, Congressional Black Caucus districts. A lot of CBC members have endorsed Joe Biden. They're trying to pick off as many delegate wins as they can in those districts where they are weighted stronger delegate districts as well. So that's the roadmap for Joe Biden at this point. The other big formula, though, is what you've been talking about all night. The field has to narrow, and they especially look at Tom Steyer and how he was polling very strong in Nevada and South Carolina early on. He fell off the map, really, in Nevada. They hope to see the same happen here in South Carolina tonight, and they say Michael Bloomberg should see Tom Steyer as a cautionary tale for what happens. The party desperately wants to rally around somebody who can win. The Biden campaign has made beating Trump front and center of its argument since the beginning, and now Bernie Sanders increasingly is front and center in their argument. One last thing, I heard from a prominent Democrat here in South Carolina today that there was unusually high turnout in Charleston in some of the more affluent, you could call them Joe Cunningham Republican voter precincts. Those are Democrats who want to see a freshman Democrat in a Republican-leaning district reelected to the House, and they don't think Bernie Sanders at the top of the ticket is that person. So Joe Biden, things have not always gone his way in this campaign, but they may be going right at the right time. And the fear among those moderate Democrats about a Bernie Sanders at the top of the ticket coalescing with a map that's favorable to Joe Biden finally at this point.
Mike Memoli in the gym, standing in front of the 10-foot version of Mike Memoli on the wall in the back of the gym. Mike, thank you very much. And over to Steve again. We're pivoting a bit while we wait for a raw number to come out of South Carolina to preview Tuesday.
Yeah, this is the big question here for Biden. Obviously, you've been talking about it, Mike, just was, can he use this as a springboard into this? Tuesday night, over 1,300 delegates are up for grabs. Biden is hindered. You've been talking about it, the lack of money he's had. Bloomberg's been on the airwaves here. He hasn't. Sanders has some big advantages. It was clear that this night was going to be better for Sanders than Biden. The question is how much better. Let me take you through what tonight could mean for Super Tuesday. Let's start in California. Sorry, let me try that again. Let's start in California. The pen isn't working. Let's start in California, though. 415 delegates. This is a third of what's up for grabs on Tuesday. Now, the problem for Biden here is all of the polling has pointed to a very big Bernie Sanders win. So big, in fact, that there is a question of whether any candidate except Sanders will hit that crucial 15% threshold to get delegates. So, number one, if you're Joe Biden, what do you want out of tonight? You want enough momentum to clear the 15% statewide hurdle in California, to be able to get delegates statewide there, and to keep Bernie Sanders from gobbling up 300 of those delegates. If nobody else is hitting that threshold, Sanders could be in position to get 300 delegates out of California. So Biden hopes that he can hit 15% there. He can contain the damage in California. You move to Texas, the second biggest prize. The polling has been more competitive between Biden and Sanders in Texas. If you're Joe Biden, you hope ideally this could propel you to a win in Texas, or at least something close where Sanders isn't getting a big delegate advantage out of it. And then Mike was just talking about it, the states with large African-American populations. If South Carolina is a preview of coming attractions, so to speak, start here in Arkansas. These states in here in the Southeast that are voting on Tuesday, if Biden could run up, get victories, and to the extent possible, run up the score in these states, he could end up netting over Sanders, let's say 75, 80 delegates or so. He could start to eat into that California advantage that Sanders is going to have. If you're Biden, you want to survive on Tuesday. You're going to be behind Sanders in total delegates. You want to be within striking distance. You want to emerge from Tuesday with a clear one-on-one, and we can talk about this later. You want to be in position to take advantage because that calendar later in March may be more favorable to Biden.
And you're probably going to need free media to make your points coming out of a victory in South Carolina. Claire McCaskill, what happens to your political party after tonight?
Well, I think it's still going to be a lot of angst. There's going to be a lot of emotion. There's going to be a lot of people that are upset, both Bernie supporters who don't understand why everyone's not getting on board, and people who don't think Bernie should be at the top of the ticket because they're in more conservative states. They're going to worry about why aren't these other people dropping out. And Steve just ran through something that I think sometimes we forget, and that is the margins matter. How big a margin you have. You know, we used to have winner take all. And that was a much different primary process. I'm sitting next to the guy who knows the way to count delegates. He is somebody who is a delegate counter in his gut. And this is going to be delegate counting now. How close can Bernie and Joe Biden keep to one another to keep one from running away with a margin that is hard to catch? And that's why the swath of Southwest states and going into the South, and then on March 10th, when you have more conservative states that are going to be voting, you have to assume that the more conservative states are going to be more Joe Biden friendly than states like California, which I don't think we'd call conservative.
Claire, endorsements don't always make a difference. The Jim Clyburn endorsement seemed to make a really big difference for a few reasons. It was heartfelt, it was well-timed, and Joe Biden just had one of those weeks where an emotional endorsement from Jim Clyburn seemed to up his game. He had an emotional performance at a town hall the next night. How does the Biden campaign replicate that formula?
Well, it's hard to replicate the affection that the voters of South Carolina have for Jim Clyburn in other states. You would have to have a figure like Jim Clyburn, who has such resonance in the black community that when he speaks, he has such authority and comes with such integrity that it really moves voters, particularly voters in the black community. So they will, I'm sure, the Biden campaign is busy looking for those types of figures, but there aren't, unfortunately for the Biden campaign, there's not a lot of Jim Clyburns out there.
Would an Obama endorsement do it?
Yeah, except I got to tell you, I think that President Obama is going to be respectful of the process. I think he will take the position. I haven't talked to him about it. Maybe others have, but I haven't talked to him about it. But I have to assume he wants to support the nominee. And I think he will, he probably wouldn't have liked it if somebody put the finger on the scale in the middle of his fight for delegates. And I think he'll probably wait and let this play out further and see how Joe and Bernie and the other candidates do in the next couple of weeks.
David Plouffe, you're not avoiding this question. We're just going to move the camera to the left, after all. Do you concur?
Let's talk about delegates. Yeah, I think President Obama and I think other leading figures, we're still early in this process. And I think you certainly want to let more time, more voting happen before you put a thumb on the scale. I'm not even sure it would be helpful. Because I think right now the question is, Joe Biden just have a great night, is can he continue to put this together? And just to really follow on both what Claire said and Steve about California, you know, I talked to some folks in the Bloomberg campaign today, and their data would show if the California primary happened today, he would cross the statewide threshold and Biden wouldn't. So that tells you Joe Biden, this again is maybe the best political night of his life. He gets to enjoy it for 5 seconds, and then he's got to move on and fully capitalize. So if he's not able to get viable in California, no matter how well he does in the South, and I think he could do well, it's going to be super challenging for him. The other thing to remember is over 2 million votes have already been cast in Super Tuesday states. So the early vote largely was happening at a time where Joe Biden was not doing particularly well. So he's also, I think, going to have to overperform on Election Day votes in places like California and Texas.
What would be the most important things that Biden could do right now to, in your words, get viable in California, given the resources that he's got, given the talent that he's got, given how he's been performing as a candidate, given his options? And we know he's off to Selma tomorrow, and he's got to keep the whole map in mind beyond just California. What's the most important thing he could do to get himself above 15% in the Golden State?
Well, first of all, give an amazing speech tonight. And I would say not even give a great first 60 or 90 seconds. that whips around California and elsewhere. He's got to really nail that. Secondly, he's going to have to do a tremendous amount of satellite TV into California, online interviews, African-American and Latino interviews. The Latino community right now is breaking Sanders' way, and that's a big problem for Joe Biden, at least it is in California. I think Biden will do a little better in that community in Texas, which is slightly more conservative. They're going to have to, it is late for advertising. You can still do a lot of digital ads, though, potentially on Monday. So they're up against it because a lot of votes in California have already come in. So he is going to have to overperform on Election Day vote. But that's how precarious this is. As well as he did tonight, I think this whole campaign could come down to what happens in California. And if Bernie Sanders is the only one viable and he does net, triple digits in terms of delegates, it's going to be really hard to erase that. Now, if both Biden and Bloomberg are viable in California, you could make the argument that that's actually helpful to Biden.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Claire. As we go to a break, Terry McAuliffe has endorsed Joe Biden. We were expecting it maybe tomorrow, but the former Virginia governor is on the board.
Very important state forthcoming.
Yep, as that comes up. So a break in our coverage. There is the news of this hour, and certainly within the hour, we are going to hear from that man. Also, new numbers coming into Steve Kornacki. All of it covered live right here. Please stay with us. Here is the story of the night, the story of the hour, certainly. We called it when the polls close, which usually means only one thing. We have clear and convincing evidence that when all of the votes are counted in South Carolina, Joe Biden is going to come out on top. 1% of it is in this hour. Steve Kornacki has more on the delegate math, which is really going to start to be the conversation.
Yeah, Brian, this is becoming a delegate race right now. Biden and Sanders coming at it tonight. We will see what the final numbers are, but I was setting this up a minute ago. We can show you here again, looking ahead to Super Tuesday, and David Plouffe was talking about this, the range of margins for Bernie Sanders coming out of California on Tuesday. It is a massive range right now, and it is going to depend on whether anybody else can hit 15%. I was just playing around with our delegate simulator in the commercial break right there, and if you set it so that no other candidate gets 15% statewide, you're looking at Sanders getting over 300, maybe like 330 delegates out of California. If you set it so two other candidates just get 15, that Sanders number comes down to like 200. It's a huge range. It's entirely dependent on other candidates hitting that 15% mark. As David said, single biggest variable. The other variable, too, we showed you in the Southeast here, states where, based on what you're seeing tonight, Biden has the potential to do very well with African-American voters, the potential to win. The other variable in these states to think about is Michael Bloomberg. He's been on the airwaves in these states with millions, tens of millions of dollars, while Biden has not been. Does Bloomberg hit that 15% threshold in a lot of these southern states where perhaps Biden is positioned to do very well right now? Would that cut into the delegate haul that Biden has the potential to get out of these states? And I mentioned Bloomberg as a complicating factor in those southern states for Joe Biden. Two other complicating factors for Joe Biden. One of them lives in Minnesota. Amy Klobuchar, her home state goes on Tuesday. The polling we've been seeing out of Minnesota shows Klobuchar and Sanders doing very well there. Biden further back. Biden may lag in delegates coming out of a pretty big state there. And Massachusetts, you showed the scene from Massachusetts earlier. Elizabeth Warren's home state. Bernie Sanders campaigning there. There's a new poll out tonight. Sanders narrowly ahead of Warren there, but Biden much farther back. So again, Biden may lag in delegates coming out of Massachusetts, coming out of Minnesota, coming out of California. Can he get enough out of here? Can he contain the damage in California? Because again, when you get to states like Florida, like Arizona, could be some big opportunities later this month for Joe Biden.
If I had told you this would be the plot line on this day,
no,
would you have believed me, or would you have called the authorities to have me gently escorted out of work?
I mean, we knew that there was going to be something a little bit nuts when we had the 4 early states and then 3 days later, Super Tuesday that includes Texas and California. I mean, we knew that was going to be like a door slamming shut on this primary. What we didn't know is that we'd have so many candidates contending for different slices of the electorate. And to see Sanders cruising at the level that he's cruising and to see everybody else scrambling to come up with a way to head him off, I mean, one of the things that I keep going to is that with all of the candidates other than Senator Sanders, you can think about those brokered conversations. Can we work something out? Can I promise you something? Can I offer you a potential vice presidential nod if we can come to an arrangement that will be beneficial to me? You can't really imagine those conversations around Senator Sanders?
No, they're the opposite, right? You can imagine somebody offering up, and he's, I mean, you said it before, he's a leader of a movement. His supporters are happier with him than I think any political, maybe Trump's voters feel that way about Trump. But I think that, I mean, what I'm hearing from people is immense pressure on Mike Bloomberg, that this was an expensive calamity, that this may cost Joe Biden the nomination.
You don't want to be that guy.
Yeah, because as strong as Bernie is, that's the main reason he's winning. Joe Biden, until tonight, had appeared weak enough that Mike Bloomberg jumped in. I mean, so this show of strength, I think a lot of people that are either in the center of our politics, people who know Mike Bloomberg from Republican politics. One wrote me, this is someone who knows and likes Mike Bloomberg, and said it was going to be very difficult to win for Mike Bloomberg, you know, having the inability to like people. I mean, I think people feel like when he got on the debate stage and looked like he didn't really want to be there, they think that ended. The dream died. Right. The paid ads were great. He's got really smart advisors. Kevin Sheekey, Howard Wolfson, and Tim O'Brien are some of the best in the business. And to your point earlier, I mean, if you could almost import some of those people to work alongside the Biden team, that might be one way to do it.
If you look at, you know, the rosiest possible scenario for the Biden people, though, I mean, there is a rosy scenario there for them. You know, if you look at, if these numbers in South Carolina hold, I think they can feel pretty confident about that southern sweep that Kornacki was just talking about. They can feel, I don't think they'll feel particularly threatened by Michael Bloomberg in those states.
But if they don't have enough money or campaign to compete in California, and Sanders gets 300 delegates out of California.
California is the thing, California and Texas, frankly, because the polls in Texas were kind of close. If he could fight Sanders to a draw in Texas, for example, and keep him from running away from him in California. Then the rosy scenario is he does better in the, so that's from the Biden point of view. The Sanders point of view, you know, the rosy scenario is the exact opposite, right? He wipes the floor with everybody in California. Nobody else reaches 15%, and try to catch me, you know, and you won't.
As you add a verb tense to it, the Sanders strategy is also that he's already wiped the floor, because they've been voting while he's been winning.
Well, that's true.
So I think Sanders' advantage is also built into the calendar.
If you were visiting from another planet and you arrived tonight to watch MSNBC's coverage of this, you would say, now wait, why in this scenario on this planet, in this political party, is the ticket not some combination of Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden? Or Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. If the Democrats have fought themselves to a point where, as David Plouffe keeps saying tonight, those are the only two potential nominees, those are the only two people who could do it, why don't they just combine forces and run as a ticket? Now, here on Earth One, that feels unimaginable. But we should also start to pry our minds open to that possibility as well.
It's the new unity ticket. It used to mean a Republican and a Democrat. Now in each party, it means a figure of the establishment and a figure of the, you know, where sort of the energy in the grassroots is.
Oh, I'm getting tickets for this. Let's go to our guests on Earth 2. And David Plouffe and Robert Gibbs are standing by. Robert, starting with you, we haven't seen you for a while. If you were appointed Democratic Party chair, and just mentioning it obviously will start a groundswell. If you were appointed Democratic Party chair tonight, what would you say in that closed-door meeting to the candidates?
Well, to which candidates? To Bernie and Biden or to the others?
Throw them all in.
Well, I do think, and David said this, I mean, I do think tonight really does winnow the field, because you see again in these states who can put together a coalition that's going to look a lot more like the overall Democratic electorate. It doesn't look like Iowa and New Hampshire. It looks a lot like Nevada, and it looks a lot like South Carolina. We're talking about California and Texas. Bernie did really well a week ago with Hispanic voters, and that's going to be real strength for him in the two biggest prizes that sit out there on Super Tuesday. The next two biggest prizes, North Carolina and Virginia, have strong Hispanic vote, but stronger African-American vote. And so you see that it is hard if you're sitting there talking to these campaigns that you've got more than two people, maybe two and a half, that have any path to this?
Looking at that, we're watching these numbers come in, and Robert, and looking right now with Senator Sanders below viability and at 10%. Again, we've got 2% of the vote in here. I mean, the Sanders theory of the case is, again, as we've been saying, motivating first-time voters who are not turning out in larger numbers. Motivating young voters who are not turning out in larger numbers. And if anybody knows anything about winning the Democratic nomination and about what it takes for a Democratic nominee to win a general election, it is black voters.
Absolutely.
And if Senator Sanders continues to underperform systematically with black voters, and if we see him get shellacked, not just beaten, but shellacked tonight in South Carolina because of his performance with black voters, that's a existential question about that nomination.
Undoubtedly. And look, he did much better with African-American voters a week ago in Nevada. South Carolina is a very special state for Joe Biden. He spent a lot of time there, and it's going to pay off tonight. I think one of the things we don't really know yet is we've had a week of electability concerns about Bernie Sanders from people. We've had a week of down-ballot concerns from people. We've had, as you mentioned, a week of talking about, the electorate really doesn't look a whole lot different than you said it would. And we don't know if what amount of that impacted some of this vote tonight. It may have. I mean, Eugene talked about this. He talked to a lot of voters that sounded like they were making very calculated decisions. It's not just like it was maybe 4 or 12 years ago, who'd you fall in love with? They're precise arguments. So we don't know the answer to how that may have affected this. But it is a big night for Joe Biden. But I want to pump the brakes a little bit. Let's get into a March Madness analogy since we're on the cusp of March. Joe Biden won the Sweet 16 game tonight, okay? He gets to go to the Elite Eight. But he's a long way away from the Final Four and the title game. He's still got a lot of blocking and tackling. I'm now mixing my metaphors, but he's got a lot of, let's say, dribbling and shooting to do to get his team ready to win those next couple of games. This was a great electorate for him, right? It was older. It was strongly African-American. You could see it from the exit polls that share of younger voters was really going to hurt Bernie Sanders. We move to a very national race, right? This is not a series of small contests anymore. This is a national race starting right now. And the question, I think, is, does Joe Biden have the structure in place as a candidate and as a campaign to take advantage of this momentum tonight? Because, as we said, he doesn't have a lot of paid advertising on the next set of states, and they're really crucial for what happens next.
Robert Gibbs just said something really important. Bernie Sanders had a week of people questioning his electability and his record. That's because there's only been 1 week where anyone went after Bernie Sanders. I mean, we sat here for the NBC debate 2 weeks ago. Nobody went after Bernie Sanders. They've only been challenging Bernie Sanders' record, his past statements, his comments in an interview with 60 Minutes for 1 week. So I think that the campaigns have to look at what happens tonight and I think maybe be reminded that there are contrasts to be made in debates, in interviews, and if you have the money in paid advertising, they matter.
Even that criticism was splintered because Fidel Castro got some of it. One name we haven't heard in a little bit is Mayor Pete, and our own Vaughn Hilliard is at Buttigieg headquarters in, notably, Raleigh, North Carolina. Hey, Vaughn, what can you tell us?
Brian, Pete Buttigieg left South Carolina this morning to head just north here to North Carolina. Look, this is a campaign that did invest time. They invested energy into that state. In fact, he visited South Carolina, held more events in South Carolina than any other candidate other than Tom Steyer. This is a campaign that finished first in Iowa, then came in second in New Hampshire, then third in Nevada, and that they understood that they needed to go make a play here in Nevada and South Carolina to head into Super Tuesday. I just was talking with a campaign aide just a moment ago, and that campaign aide told me they're looking to Super Tuesday, and they plan to execute a delegate game. You know, Mike was talking about this earlier, and the reality, though, for Pete Buttigieg is that he's no longer the man in second place in the national delegate count. And I should know, I was talking with a senior campaign official before the Nevada caucus, and they said that this campaign had to prove that they could win over black and brown voters in Nevada and South Carolina. Nevada was test number 1. Tonight was test number 2. That official told me that they needed to have that permission structure to head to Super Tuesday. Of course, this is the candidate that wanted to be in a one-on-one race with Bernie Sanders coming out of New Hampshire, but now you're looking at him potentially being third, fourth in that national delegate count. For Pete Buttigieg, he will be taking the stage behind me here. And the question is, can they go on through March? They're planning to go by congressional district and trying to pull off enough to stay. Their goal is to stay within a 350 margin delegate spread with Bernie Sanders out of Super Tuesday. The question is, can they compete with Joe Biden now coming out of South Carolina? Brian?
Vaughn, we've heard so much about the interesting and I think shrewd plan by the Buttigieg campaign to try to take delegates wherever they can, as you're just describing, go congressional district to congressional district to win by math. But is there a single state on Super Tuesday that they believe they could actually win? Is there some place where Pete Buttigieg thinks that he could have another first-place finish to follow up the only one he's had thus far in Iowa?
I pressed campaign officials on that just this afternoon, and they were not willing to go as far as to suggest that he could actually win any of those states on Super Tuesday. Instead, suggesting that if they're able to meet the 15% threshold in several of these congressional districts, essentially keeping that margin within striking distance of Bernie Sanders, they're saying that they believe that they can make the map look like it did in Iowa. And if they can keep Bernie Sanders under that 15% threshold in some of these congressional districts, but when you go look at the map in New Hampshire, there were 16 counties. Bernie Sanders met 15% in each of those counties. You go over to Nevada, he met that 15% threshold in all 10 of those counties. So when you're going through the math game, it becomes really tough for the Pete Buttigieg campaign to contest that they're able to make a significant play on Super Tuesday. We should note they really are pressing, though, that they believe that March 10th states, March 17th states, those are states like Michigan, Illinois, Arizona, Missouri, Louisiana. That's where they believe that they can make a greater play.
Hey, Vaughn Hilliard, thank you very much for that, for bringing us up to speed on the Buttigieg campaign tonight. Another break for us. When we come back, we go back to Steve Kornacki, who is starting to add to the raw numbers that we will have by the end of the night. But there's the story right there. Getting pretty hot inside the gymnasium in South Carolina because they are anticipating any minute now the arrival of tonight's victor in South Carolina. Over we go to the big board. Steve Kornacki. And Steve, I note the map is filling in.
We have results. You know, these caucus states, these took days to get, but here we go, just a few minutes after polls closing. We are starting to get some real numbers here in South Carolina. Not a lot, but again, you see initially here, Biden 53%, very early. Sanders an extremely distant second, followed very closely by Tom Steyer. I can tell you that the vast majority of what you're seeing right now were absentee votes. These were votes that were cast before Election Day. We saw in 2016 that the absentee votes, Sanders did substantially worse among absentee voters in 2016 than he did among same day. So if that pattern holds when the same day starts coming in, you might see Sanders moving up a bit here. You might see Biden falling off a bit. Again, I'm not talking about something that's going to change the outcome of this election or even call it into question. But if it's 39 now, that spread between Biden and Sanders, that may get a little bit narrower as you start to get the same day. But again, just overwhelming here. This Biden blue color, get used to it because it's probably going to fill in a lot of these other counties. Our exit poll telling us, not surprisingly, based on what we showed you, that Biden's support is running particularly strong in sort of this region of the state. A lot of counties in here have large African-American populations. Joe Biden, again, getting 60% of the black vote, so he might do particularly well in some of these counties in here. But really, north to south, east to west, you're going to be looking at Biden blue on this map tonight. And again, it's a question there. Keep in mind as these numbers come in, does Sanders move north of 15% to be eligible for statewide delegates? Does Steyer get up to 15%? Can he steal any delegates? Just how big is the Biden delegate haul going to be from South Carolina? It's going to be very big. Could it get to enormous? That's the question.
Well, Steve, let me just ask you, I know it's early in terms of the amount of vote that we've got in, but do you have enough or have you seen enough data and combining it with the exit polls to suggest that Biden might win every county in the state?
I can't tell you every single county because we don't have the exit polls at that level. But when you're looking at the scale that our exit poll is suggesting here, and the scale that the early results are suggesting, you're seeing better than 3-1 right here. It is certainly possible. I can't look at this map. I can't look at our exit poll and say, there's where Bernie Sanders is going to win. I mean, we'll take a look when this comes in up here. Pickens County, Clemson University, a lot of students up here. Sanders did better here in 2016 than he did statewide. But to do better versus actually winning it might be a stretch to see Sanders winning that. I think sweeping all 46 of these counties is certainly possible for Biden as these results come in.
And that is what happened with Clinton's victory over Sanders in 2016. So we've seen that dynamic at work. That, of course, was almost a 50-point victory. I can't imagine it. They're not going to be looking at that just because there's too many candidates running this year for there to be that kind of a split like we saw in 2016. But if he runs the table and wins every county, that's something.
If he has a blowout, in effect, tonight in South Carolina, this speaks to the point you've all been making, and that's the argument the Biden campaign can make to the others.
I think this is also the largest number of people that have participated in a contest yet, right? I mean, 271,000, is that what we're looking at?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's more than voted.
Just in terms of the total number of voters.
The number of participants, yeah.
Larger total number of votes than anybody so far. And let's pay attention to the turnout today, too. I'll be really interested to see if those anecdotal reports of very heavy turnout are true, because I certainly did get the sense of talking with people, when they said they intended to vote, I believe them, and the sense of urgency about the November election and thus about picking the right candidate.
Let me ask you about a piece of that. One of the things we've been hearing anecdotally, there's been a lot of speculation about it, and there's a little bit of anecdotal evidence to suggest it, but the turnout overall has not been great. In Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, it's ranged from meh to okay. And part of the sort of discussion around that in Democratic circles has been that Democratic voters, a lot of them think, yeah, I'd love somebody to run against Trump, and whoever they're going to run, I will vote for them. I don't particularly care who it is. That there isn't a lot of passion over a broad swath of the Democratic electorate that's getting people out to vote in the primary. They're going to be happy to turn out and vote in the general as long as the person is running against Trump. Were you seeing any dynamic like that in South Carolina?
Maybe, I mean, because certainly a lot of people told me, whoever they nominate, I'll definitely vote for them.
You did hear that.
I did hear that. But just as a practical matter, I would be concerned about turnout in general in the primary season. I don't think you can count on that all of a sudden turning into powerhouse turnout in November. You just can't count on that. So, if I were Tom Perez and or any of the Democratic candidates, I would really hope for a big turnout tonight and big turnout on Super Tuesday.
Particularly because in the general election, African-American voter turnout is going to likely make the difference between whether the Democrat or the Republican wins.
Indeed, would have made the difference last time.
Yeah, and we saw, I believe, in South Carolina's primary in 2016, a sign of what was to come in the general election. In 2008, in the South Carolina Democratic primary, there was more than 500,000 people who voted. In 2016, there was less than 400,000 people who voted. And so, for whatever reason, there wasn't the enthusiasm to get people turn out in the primary. And then we did see less voter turnout, particularly less African-American voter turnout in the general election, and the Republican won. And so those things don't map exactly, but they do hint at each other.
They hint at each other.
And I think if Democrats had to pick one thing to worry about thus far in their primary, it's not who's going to win. It's that not enough Democrats are turning out and voting in these contests.
What we have had here thus far tonight is a gathering of friends and colleagues, but it hasn't been a party officially. Now it is. James Carville is
that makes it a party.
With us. James, it's nice to have your voice added to the conversation. Lead-off question, what in your view just happened? How did things change tonight in the Democratic race? What's your message to the Democrats?
Well, it's simply this. The single most important demographic in the Democratic Party spoke up tonight, and that's African Americans. And they spoke loudly and they spoke clearly. And this is our most loyal voting base. And by the way, just to be political about it, they happen to be very strategically located in places like North Carolina, in places like Georgia, in places like Pennsylvania, in places like Texas, in places like Florida. So we're going to have to listen, and these voters are going to be speaking as we go forward. And Senator Sanders is just going to have to answer questions. Is if you want to be the nominee of the Democratic Party and you have this kind of relationship with the most loyal constituency and best Democrats in the United States, what do you have to say about that? And I think that this is what happened tonight. We get all enamored, and then we are reminded of what and who the Democratic Party is. And I think that was a lot of the lesson that we saw tonight, and we'll see it going forward in more of these primaries.
James Carville, this is Rachel Maddow here in New York. It's great to have you with us. You have been so blunt and so willing to court controversy over the course of this. It makes you a very valuable guest. What do you make of all... Well, you know, you're a tough guy. We know you can take it. What do you make of all this discussion tonight about the sheer competence of the Biden campaign and whether or not he, in fact, needs to restart, reset? If he's going to try to become a top-tier contender, he's going to need to change things radically.
Yeah, he will. And I mean, I think Congressman Clyburn is the MVP of this whole thing. And so my hat's off to Congressman Clyburn. And also, I mean, look, Vice President Biden was up against the wall, and he worked hard, and he performed. I thought he did really well in that debate we had last Tuesday night. So he had a lot to do with this also. It's going to be tough going forward. But the other thing is we don't know the effect. I've had a couple of people, pretty reliable people, saying that they have detected some effect of, Trump and the Republicans wanting people to vote for Bernie Sanders, particularly upstate. Now, that's something that we're going to have to investigate. It may be something discernible, but people, good political scientists, will be able to look at these returns pretty quickly and tell you if it was any effect. But it's something that warrants investigation.
Warrants investigation? I mean, it's not illegal. It's not shenanigans.
No. Yeah. It's not illegal at all. It's an open primary. But why? You want to ask yourself the question, why would the Trump people be voting for Bernie Sanders? And I think we know the answer.
James, what's the message from you to Mike Bloomberg?
I don't give people worth $60 billion a lot of things, but he's going to be there Super Tuesday, and he's invested a lot in Super Tuesday. So I mean, let's see how he does. It's going to be pretty interesting, and a lot of delegates are coming really fast here, and let's see what happens. I mean, maybe Vice President Biden, I'm sure he'll get some momentum out of tonight. But look, we're going to be sitting here Tuesday night, and things are going to change, too, because Sanders is almost certain to win California. He'll probably do very well in Texas. I mean, we were here last Saturday in Nevada, and I proclaimed him the front runner. He is still the front runner. But he's a front runner that's tripped a little bit here. So we'll see where it goes here. But clearly, Senator Sanders right now is the front runner, but he does have a problem that he does not connect with the most important demographic in our party, not his party, our party.
James, you're one of the most brilliant campaign strategists and tacticians. Just like line by line, what does Biden do? What does that staff meeting look like tonight with the candidate? What's the message to the candidate? What do they do tomorrow? What do they do Monday?
Nicole, we've both been there. First of all, they're exhausted. They can't process the checks. They can't get on television. They're trying to get the schedule set. Do you go to Alabama? Do you go to Arkansas? Do you go to Tennessee? Do you go to North Carolina? Do you go to Texas? All the shows want him, the bookers are calling, and they have a lot of decisions to make tonight. And right now, they got to quit thinking about winning South Carolina, and they only got 2 days before people start voting again. So that campaign there's a lot of people in that room that are trying to make a lot of decisions, and they didn't have their finances were not in particularly good shape. I think I read they only had like $1 million buy for Super Tuesday. Well, you can't buy any television now, so that's kind of out of the question. And everybody's screaming and yelling. I mean, that's what a campaign is about. But you'd rather have this problem than the problem you had after Nevada when your phone didn't ring.
James, we were talking before about what Bloomberg's options are here, right? Bloomberg has been very clear that the reason he's running is because he wants to beat Donald Trump. The reason he got in is because he thought that it starting to look like Joe Biden might not have a chance at doing so, and he thought he'd be the next best choice. I've been arguing here on set, and maybe you can talk me out of it, that if Mike Bloomberg does mostly want Donald Trump out of the White House, that he should make his decision before Super Tuesday, because Mike Bloomberg isn't going to run the table on Super Tuesday. He's likely to just deny anybody else the chance to win and to knock Bernie Sanders out of the front-runner position. Shouldn't Bloomberg be making his decision now so that somebody else can compete on Tuesday?
Look, he's not going to drop out before Super Tuesday. I mean, he spent all of his money, and he just, I don't think there's much chance he'll do that. The other thing with the 15%, if he gets over 15%, he's actually not hurting anything. I mean, I don't think it's going to be pretty hard for Vice President Biden to get to 1991. It's probably going to be pretty hard for Bernie Sanders too. So I'm sure they'll have to reevaluate. But if he's running 15% ahead, he's stopping. He kicks in on the proportional representation. What would be scary if Bernie Sanders carried California and it ended up 14 and no one else broke 15, then he'd end up with 100% of the statewide delegates. That's highly unlikely. But, you know, I guess it's mathematically possible.
Hey, James, don't move. For viewers just joining us, 1 minute after the 8 o'clock hour here in the East, the lead story is a big victory for Joe Biden in South Carolina. One of the subplots tonight is Mike Bloomberg, and he has just said something about the Biden campaign and about his own fortune, and our own Josh Letterman is standing by to tell us about that. Josh?
Well, Brian, in a few words, the Bloomberg campaign officials I've been speaking with say that tonight means nothing. They're pointing out that this is one contest that Joe Biden has won and that he was always expected to do very well, if not outright win here in South Carolina. So they're saying basically nothing to see here. They're also pointing out that, look, if this is about trying to stop Sanders, they are very aware that the narrative coming out tonight is not going to be great for Bloomberg, that there's going to be some really difficult questions that are raised about whether Bloomberg, by staying in this race, is actually just eating away at moderate votes that could be consolidating behind a candidate like Biden to try to stop someone more progressive like Sanders. But they say, look, if it's about trying to stop Sanders, Biden absolutely has not proven that he can do that. They say, look, all of these candidates, including Biden, have been in the race for close to a year. They had 8 debates before Mike Bloomberg ever even took the stage. And in the first 4 contests, Bernie Sanders won 3 of them. Joe Biden won a single race. And so they're saying that coming out of tonight, there is still no proof that Biden can actually defeat Sanders and then go on to take on Donald Trump. And so they're saying there's no reason for them to reconsider at this point what to do moving forward. They feel very good about the Super Tuesday states, particularly Virginia, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Tennessee, some of these southern states. And they are also feeling good about the fact that so many votes were cast early in those states, in the weeks before all of these negative stories started coming out about Mike Bloomberg, and his poll numbers started to drop a bit. So they're hoping that enough votes for Mike Bloomberg were locked in before that, that he could outright win some states on Super Tuesday.
Hey, Josh, before we lose you, I couldn't help but notice the chairman of the Democratic Party shouting over your shoulder. What is that event in Charlotte?
Yeah, this is a dinner that the state Democratic Party is holding here in Charlotte, North Carolina. We're expecting Mike Bloomberg to take the stage just behind me any minute. That'll be his first reaction formally to tonight's election results. Amy Klobuchar also will be speaking here in Charlotte this evening.
All right, Josh, thank you. And James, this Bloomberg news was related to me that the Biden effort was, quote, not worth Mike Bloomberg's money.
You know, what's going to happen here, if he does not do well on Super Tuesday, it's going to be excruciating pain. I mean, but there's nothing going to happen in the next 48 hours. And we're just going to have to see. But, you know, I suspect we're going to have a different feel here come Wednesday, you know, at least Wednesday morning. And, you know, this is the beginning of the next phase of the campaign. But not much chance that Bloomberg, you know, let's see where he is Wednesday morning and where Vice President Biden is and Bernie Sanders. And there's a lot to be decided here in 48 hours, so I don't think we should get ahead of ourselves just yet. But it's undoubtedly Vice President Biden had a terrific debate, and he had a big night in South Carolina tonight. That's true as it can be.
James, let me just ask you about what we just heard from Josh Letterman from the Bloomberg campaign. They're expressing confidence that there are states they think Bloomberg can outright win on Super Tuesday. Do you think that's right?
I would say the same thing. I mean, campaigns are going to say that. I mean, it's a kind of nature of it. And by the way, if you don't think you can win, at least that's always been my theory, then you're not going to win. So, we're going to know soon enough. But I've been on campaigns where I knew I was going to lose, and I'd say, well, I think we got a shot if we just can get the vote out here, and we can manipulate that. I mean, I wouldn't believe anything that the campaign told me. They're not the. When it comes to
But do you think he can win anything on Super Tuesday? Do you look ahead to any of those 14 states and think any of those are Bloomberg number one?
Yeah, I'm going to defer because I've been so concentrated on South Carolina and on what we had this week. But I do think that the chances will lessen tonight because I do think that Vice President Biden is going to have a head of steam. One thing that we should look at tonight, this is just a little political consultant trick. On the podium, when the vice president comes, I want to see the ratio of African Americans to whites. It's going to be kind of interesting to see who's in the shot, because that's the shot that everybody's going to see. That's going to be the headline. It's going to be in all the newspapers. It's going to be the backdrop. It's going to be everything. And the biggest thing, everybody wants to be on that podium, trust me. The donors want to be on there. The politicians want to be on there. The streetwalker, the people that walk the precincts want to be on there. So just look at that, because that is a topic of discussion right now in the Biden campaign, is who's going to be where, who's going to be in the shot.
All right, James, thank you. I want to let you know they were just waving at your image on the big screen at Biden headquarters, and most of them seem to be using all 5 fingers. So that's a positive Saturday.
Yeah, that wasn't always the case.
James, thank you very much. James Carville from the great city of New Orleans. Steve Kornacki, there's several different ways we can go here. I see what your graphic says. I'll raise you a preview of California, if you got one, and I'll raise you a question. Where can Mike Bloomberg win?
Let's start on that question of where Mike Bloomberg can win. What you're looking at here on Super Tuesday, these are states that have substantial black electorates in them. Remember, we're talking tonight about Joe Biden absolutely cleaning up among black voters. So the question of where Bloomberg can win and the question of where Biden can win Tuesday, they kind of intersect here, because some of the best polling numbers that you've been seeing from Mike Bloomberg are in these states in here. These are also the states, and especially right here in the Southeast, with the most significant black voting blocks on Tuesday. So it's where Biden hopes to capitalize. It's where Bloomberg has been spending money, where he's been getting some movement in the polls. I'm going to give credit here. Our colleague Katie Turr, she just tweeted this. She said she talked to somebody from the Bloomberg team who said they think they can win Virginia, North Carolina, Arkansas, Alabama, Oklahoma. Those are exactly the states that Joe Biden would like to roll this big victory in South Carolina into on Tuesday. He'd like to be the one running away with these. He'd like to be the one collecting all the delegates here, but there is certainly a possibility that it'll be Mike Bloomberg either winning them or crossing that 15% threshold and collecting delegates. And you mentioned California, just to show you the most recent poll. This came out yesterday. This is in California. You're talking about that scenario of only Sanders clearing the 15% threshold. In this poll, it's more than theoretical. It happened in this poll. No other candidate crossed the 15% threshold. In a scenario like this is from our friends at CNN, in a scenario like this, Bernie Sanders would be getting something like 300, 320, 330, something like that, of the state's 415 delegates. There'd be peanuts for everybody else just in the congressional districts around the state. The difference between only Sanders hitting 35 and 1 or 2 of these other candidates, it is the single biggest variable. We've been talking about that on Tuesday, and that's where the Bloomberg factor could cut the other way if you're Biden. Look at that, 13 for Biden, 12 for Bloomberg. Are they each keeping the other from crossing 15% and from getting into delegate range? And by the way, if you're Joe Biden and you're hoping to parlay that big win tonight into something on Tuesday, most of the votes in California are probably locked in. Upwards of 3 million primary votes have already been sent in to the Secretary of State. Not a lot of same-day votes are going to be cast in California comparatively.
Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah, in terms of thinking about what options these guys have and where they can still play. I will say we are still looking at vote totals as they are trickling in from South Carolina. Again, NBC has projected that the winner in South Carolina will be Joe Biden, but we've only got 11% of the vote in. We're watching those numbers coming in. If there's anybody in the world who is watching those numbers more closely than the candidates and us, it is probably Joy Reid's next guest, because in South Carolina tonight, when these primary voters turned out, they were only voting on presidential preference. They were not voting on other important statewide races, like, say, U.S. Senator, where Jamie Harrison, the former chairman of the South Carolina Democratic Party, is mounting a very powerful challenge to that state's incumbent Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. And Joy has Jamie Harrison with her now in South Carolina. Joy.
I do, and this is the person that I would want to talk to most tonight to find out what happened, why it happened. Jamie Harrison, you're also, as Rachel said, running for the United States Senate, so we want to acknowledge that that's happening too. You're on the primary ballot yourself, sort of. Yeah. I mean, you have no comment.
Well, our primary is June, in the first part of June, and so we're really excited about that.
It's a separate primary.
It's a separate primary, and we're building a great movement here. You know, Lindsey Graham had the president here to fundraise with him last night. But listen, he's going to need the president and a whole lot of other folks, because we are going to send him home. That's why we're building this movement, telling people to go to jamieharrison.com to be a part of it.
Now, when I first met you, you were working for one Jim Clyburn.
Yes.
You were his top staffer, so you know better than anyone else how powerful he is in this state and how important he is as a political figure in this state. I was just talking with one of our staffers, one of our folks on our team, who said that she was talking with an African-American voter here that was at this establishment tonight, who said that she was undecided. She made up her mind at the last minute. She was asked, well, what is it that helped you make up your mind? Jim Clyburn, hearing that anecdotally, that he really actually did make the difference for Joe Biden.
He made a huge difference. Joe Biden needs to send Jim Clyburn. I would say send him flowers, but if you know Jim Clyburn, you just want the best bottle of Jack Daniels you can get. But Joe Biden needs to say thank you to Jim Clyburn, because he solidified this vote in South Carolina for Joe Biden in this election. And he's an icon in the state, and particularly in Democratic politics.
Yeah, and so he influenced voters. Overall, do you think that the news cycle also was an influencer over voters? I know there's a lot of anxiety, just people I've talked to, people who I've been on planes with, people are getting off flights, very, very nervous about coronavirus, very, very nervous about being in a country where the president of the United States says that it's a fraud, that it's a fake, that it's made up by the news media and the Democrats. And then the contrast with somebody like former Vice President Biden, somebody who's been Vice President of the United States. Do you think that that's helped him stature-wise?
Well, I think so. And the one thing you'll know about voters here in South Carolina, they are extremely pragmatic. Right? And you look at the voters who came out tonight, these are my grandma's generations, my mom's generations. These people have gone through hard times, and they're extremely pragmatic. And Joe Biden brings that sort of expertise and that gravitas that I think assuaged these folks, that things are going to get better. But you need a steady hand at the wheel.
I've been pouring through these exit poll numbers. They're really fascinating. First of all, the difference between white South Carolina voters and black South Carolina voters. If you're still a Democrat in the South, you're pretty liberal, right? So the white Democratic voters tend to be liberal. They are more interested in seeing more liberal policies rather than Obama-era policies. Black voters, nope, the opposite, more conservative, go to church once a week, want to see more restoration of Obama-era policy. So you really had a very pragmatic, like you said, voter that was kind of moving in that direction. Right. How much of what we're seeing tonight is about the sort of pragmatism and somewhat conservatism of the South Carolina vote? And is that applicable across these southern states?
Well, I think that's definitely right on the mark. You know, one of the other things that Steve Kornacki mentioned earlier was the vote coming out of an increase in the white vote coming out of Charleston. And that's that demographic shift, that sort of new South that we're talking about. These people who are coming into the state, and they're bringing a much more moderate type politics. And so folks, they're not the same type of Republican type voters. And they're looking, again, in a very pragmatic way at who is the best person equipped in their thoughts and minds to be president of the United States.
Channel for me your former job as party chair.
Yes.
If you're Joe Biden, put the party chair hat on. You're Joe Biden's chief of staff tonight. He gets a big win tonight. It's a really decisive win on the level of what Bernie Sanders got in Nevada in terms of the volume and what it looks like it's going to be. Who do you call? Obviously, you got to call Jim Clyburn and thank him. But who do you call among the other candidates who really do seem, even at small numbers, to be taking votes from him?
Well, I would call some of the candidates that did not do well tonight here in South Carolina, but also outside of those candidates, I call a former candidate, and that's Kamala Harris. If I was on Joe Biden's team and I'm going looking at the map, you're going to call Kamala Harris. If you're right at that 13% that Steve mentioned, you're calling Kamala Harris and say, I need your endorsement. Can you endorse me?
You want that? That's the endorsement that you want if you're Joe Biden.
That's what I would, if I were in that situation,
Yeah.
that's what I would be doing.
Some sage advice, Rachel Maddow, from Jamie Harrison. I would take his advice because he knows what he's talking about in this game of politics. I'll throw it back to you, Rachel.
He does indeed. Joy Reid in Charleston with Jamie Harrison. Again, Jamie Harrison is challenging Lindsey Graham for his U.S. Senate seat and running a very interesting campaign to try to do so. He knows of what he speaks as a former top staffer to James Clyburn and as former Democratic Party chairman. I mean, the Senate races in 2020 are going to be off the hook anyway, but that one in particular is going to be one to watch.
Another break for us. When we come back, we're entering the portion of the evening where we will get to start to hear from some of these candidates. As scattered throughout the Super Tuesday states as they are, with the exception of that guy who's going to thank the people of South Carolina for the victory they've handed him tonight. While we were in the break, we received some news, and that is a second NBC News projection that when all the votes are counted in South Carolina, Bernie Sanders will come in second to Joe Biden. Over to the big board we go. Steve Kornacki, where the map continues to fill in.
So that is the closest thing that passes for good news for Bernie Sanders tonight. But notice what you didn't hear. While there is a projection that Bernie Sanders will finish second, there was no projection yet that he's going to get any of the delegates out of South Carolina. Remember, 15%. That is your magic number. You got to finish with at least 15% statewide to tap into that pool of delegates. And then they got congressional districts around the state. You got to be hitting 15% in each of those districts to be getting delegates. You don't have a confident declaration yet that that is going to happen. If past is prologue, the same-day results versus the absentee may give Sanders a boost, move him north a couple points here. But at this point, still want to see if he is going to finish not just in second, but above that delegate threshold. Biden continuing to lead. We said a lot of that vote earlier when we showed you this was the absentee vote. Now you're starting to really get the same-day vote in here. And look at that. Joe Biden continues to be north of 50% in this, 35% ahead of Bernie Sanders. Let me show you just a couple counties here where you really start to see the story of tonight. We talk about South Carolina and the importance of the black vote. We show you the exit poll with Biden up 60% of the vote among black voters. Let's look at some of the counties with large black populations, especially in a Democratic primary. Take a look, for instance, this is Dillon County over here. This is a largely black county in the Democratic primary, at least. 2/3 of the vote in here. Look at that. Biden is getting nearly 70% of the vote here, 67%, Sanders 14%. I mean, you remember Clinton versus Sanders in the two-way race in 2016. I mean, it's starting to look like that kind of result, except in a much more crowded field. You see it. Here's another county, too, large black population here in Sumter County. Look at that. Joe Biden, again, approaching 70% there. Sanders actually a little bit behind Steyer for second place, but just a very distant second place. So, again, you're just seeing dominance here from Joe Biden, particularly in strongly African-American counties. I mentioned earlier, if there's a shot for Sanders anywhere, might be Pickens County, where Clemson is, might be in the upstate area. That was his strongest area, so to speak, in 2016. Again, a little bit in here. Sanders is within 10 points in this one county. So if this map is not going to be all Biden blue, this might be the county to be looking at as the night progresses. But otherwise, just Biden dominance here. Again, we've got him projected to 20 delegates at least so far. Expect that number to rise.
That's some incredible stuff. Claire, I don't know much, but I assume politicians would like to have 70% in a given county?
Yeah, I think that especially in a crowded field. I mean, this isn't almost 70% head-to-head with somebody else. Oof. This is where there's lots of choices, and everybody is in the same party. So it is pretty remarkable. I have two questions coming out of tonight. What is the turnout?
Yeah.
And we need to figure that out. And is the turnout better than it was in 2016? And if so, what does that do to Bernie's narrative?
He's got a microphone.
That he drives turnout.
Hey, Steve?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was just talking to my producer, but I believe you were talking about turnout.
Turnout.
Yeah, that's right.
Here's
That was actually mean.
Here's what I can tell you.
It was mean.
No, it wasn't mean.
I didn't do that to you, Kornacki.
Give me a chance to talk about the election.
He did it.
Can't be
Me to
mean.
do it.
Steve, do it in Greek.
Here's what I can tell you, and I'm trying to see here if we have a completed county I can compare it to. It doesn't look like we do. The turnout, though, to keep an eye on as this comes in here. In 2016, the turnout in South Carolina in the Democratic primary was 370,000. In 2008, that was the very high-interest year. Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, John Edwards, native-born South Carolinian, it was 515,000. So, again, we're just trying to it's tough. This 18% reported doesn't quite correlate. You can't really extrapolate from this and say. So we got to see on this. But, again, this is the range we're looking for. Does it top that 370 number from 2016? And does it start to get over 400 at all? And nobody was expecting it was going to approach 515 tonight. But let's see where that falls.
Now balance on one foot. No, just kidding.
Well, the other thing, too, is that South Carolina is like the 9th fastest growing state in the country, too. And so there's a lot more people in South Carolina than there were actually just in 2008. And so you do need to think about candidates who mobilize lots of people to get out.
That's right.
And it's really important. It's a really good barometer to look at a heavily African-American state like this to see if black voters are going to turn out to vote for these candidates.
No question. And particularly if the narrative of the Bernie campaign is, I will turn out new voters. I will turn out younger voters. And that really hasn't played out yet. So let's see how this turns out. Can Biden begin saying, I can drive more voters to the polls? And will we have competing narratives? The other question I have is, let me just say this. If he doesn't get viability with 20 million,
Tom Steyer,
quit tonight if you don't get viability. If you don't get to 15% with 20 million and living in that state, he needs to quit. And then he needs to send a short note to Bloomberg. Sometimes polling doesn't match results no matter how much money you spend.
The numbers that we are seeing tonight will get more interesting as we get more of them on turnout in terms of how everybody else.
Right.
But we did just have an important piece of news with this projection that you just made, or that you just relayed, which is that the second place finisher tonight will be Bernie Sanders. That's important. And we'll watch for the margin between these two candidates. But that means that not Tom Steyer with his $20 million, not Pete Buttigieg with his very good showing in the other early states, not Warren, not Klobuchar, not Gabbard, who hasn't popped anywhere. None of them took advantage of Sanders not locking this thing down to pop themselves. And this is going to be an important I think that itself is going to be important for those other candidates.
That's important. And the other thing is something you alluded to. In a crowded field, this is a dominant performance. I mean, this is like a blowout in a crowded field. And that's really impressive when you think about it. And so the argument that I think Biden will make going forward is, you say you can turn out the young voters. I can drive African-American turnout. I can bring out that core of the Democratic Party in a way that these other candidates won't.
And who are the voters that vote the most? I mean, yes, definitely you look at demographic slices and you look at the energy behind it. But the highest propensity voters are old people. And so nobody ever likes to brag and say, I got the olds. But Joe Biden does. And if he can put together a campaign that can consolidate that favorability that he's got among older voters who do vote more than anybody else,
they do,
and speak to voters of color, then that's the magic, right? I mean, the problem that Sanders has in terms of turnout, in terms of general election viability, is in large part that older voters don't like Bernie Sanders in any states. Even when he wins states, he's still swimming upstream with older voters, and older voters vote.
Here is Elizabeth Warren, Houston, Texas. But to Rachel's point, in a crowded field, Joe Biden has, for tonight, in a state that looks much more like the Democratic Party, shut down the conversation. Luckily for everyone else in the race, the conversation goes on Super Tuesday.
Houston! So, results from South Carolina are coming in, and I want to say congratulations to Vice President Biden. I will be the first to say that the first 4 contests haven't gone exactly as I'd hoped. If you want to change the outcome in the next contest, go to ElizabethWarren.com, chip in now, get involved. Super Tuesday's 3 days away. We want to gain as many delegates to the convention as we can, from California to right here in Texas. You know, it may take days or even longer to know the full results from Super Tuesday, but they will be critical in sorting out who our nominee will be this year. My campaign is built for the long haul, and we are looking forward to these big contests. So I want to thank you. I want to start by thanking Judge Lena Hidalgo. She is amazing, the face of Houston, the future.
We go from Elizabeth Warren in Houston to the number 2 finisher tonight. Here is Bernie Sanders.
Thank you, Virginia Beach and Norfolk. And let me start off by thanking Herb Jones. For too long, we have taken veterans in this country for granted. We have sent them off to wars, and too often those wars were wars that should never have been fought. And then, after they put their lives on the line and they come home, sometimes injured in body and sometimes injured in spirit, we have forgotten about them. So my promise to Herb and to all the other veterans of this country, and I say this as the former chairman of the U.S. Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs, our administration will never forget the veterans. And our administration will never put the men and women in the armed forces in wars that should not be fought. We are here tonight because we are determined that Donald Trump will be a one-term president. The American people, no matter what their political views may be, do not want a president in office who is a pathological liar, who is running a corrupt administration, who apparently has never read the Constitution of the United States, and who every day, through his attacks on the media, on the judiciary, on Congress, is undermining American democracy. Veterans like Herb and millions of others have put their lives on the line to defend our democracy and our Constitution, and Donald Trump will not undermine American democracy. Now, I am very proud that in this campaign so far, we have won the popular vote in Iowa. We have won the New Hampshire primary. We have won the Nevada caucus. But you cannot win them all. A lot of states out there, and tonight we did not win in South Carolina. And that will not be the only defeat. There are a lot of states in this country, nobody wins them all. I want to congratulate Joe Biden on his victory tonight. And now we enter Super Tuesday in Virginia. And I believe very strongly that the people of this country on Super Tuesday and after are going to support our campaign, because we are more than a campaign, we are a movement. We are a multi-generational movement. I'm the young person. We got some old people, too. We are a multi-racial movement. And we are a movement of millions of people who demand economic justice in this country, demand social justice and the end of racism and all forms of discrimination, and who demand environmental justice as well. We are a movement of millions of people who are sick and tired of the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality in America. We are tired of a handful of billionaires controlling the economic and political life of this nation. And we will create an economy and a government that work for all of us, not just the 1%. And that is what this campaign is about. This campaign understands that in order to defeat Donald Trump, and we have to be very clear about it, can't mince words about it. In order to defeat Trump, we are going to need the largest voter turnout in the history of this country. And in my view, old-fashioned politics, the same old type of politics that doesn't excite anybody, that doesn't energize anybody, that is not going to be the campaign that beats Trump. In order to beat Trump, what we are going to have to do is speak to millions of working class people who today are working 2 or 3 jobs. They're worried about their kids. They're worried about their retirement. They can't afford health care. And they are saying, who cares about me? Who is worried about me? I've seen candidates run to billionaires' homes to raise money. Does anybody worry about me and my kids? And our job together is to reach out to those working people and say, you know what? We do care about you. Join us. Come on into our movement. And then we've got to reach out to the young people in this country. The young people in America today, and I'm proud to say this, they are the most progressive generation of young people in the history of this country. This is a generation that is strongly anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-homophobia, anti-religious bigotry. This is a generation that believes in the need to deal with the crisis of climate change. But this is also a generation that does not vote in the numbers that they need to vote. So our job, if we are going to beat Trump, is to say to those millions of young people, if you can't afford to go to college or you're leaving school deeply in debt, join us. If you're worried about the future of this planet and climate change, join us. If you are earning less money, as the younger generation is, than your parents, and you think you are entitled to a decent standard of living, join us. If you're sick and tired of trying to pay off your student debt, join us. So our job is to grow the voter turnout in America. I can't do it alone. I need every one of you to reach out to your friends. And when your friends moan and groan about this and they moan and groan about that, Tell them complaining is not good enough. They've got to get into the political process, stand up and fight for justice. Now, in case you haven't noticed, the political and economic establishment of this country, they're getting very nervous about our campaign. Just read an article the other day that the lobbyists for the military-industrial complex, they're very worried. They're worried that we may not continue spending more money on the military than the next 11 countries combined. They are worried that we're not going to allow military contractors to give us massive cost overruns. And they're very worried that we are not going to be involved in endless wars. And they are right to be worried. And it turns out the folks on Wall Street are getting worried as well. And they're worried that we're going to break up these very large banks that got us into an economic crisis 12 years ago. And you know what? They should be worried. And the drug companies, man, they are really worried. Because we are catching on to the reality that they are ripping off the American people in an unseemly way. That in some cases they are charging us 10 times more for the same exact drugs that they sell in other countries. And the insurance companies are getting just a little bit nervous because we are going to end the absurdity of the United States being the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people as a human right. Now, what the establishment is saying, what the lobbyists are saying and the political pundits are saying, everybody's saying something, Bernie Sanders can't beat Trump. Well, to those folks, I would suggest take a look at the last 70 national polls.
We're going to switch from Bernie Sanders' headquarters in Virginia back to South Carolina, where Congressman Clyburn is about to address the crowd and bring out former Vice President Joe Biden.
Thank you very, very much. Let me begin by thanking all of you for taking a little time out of your lives to come here and help us enhance the life of this great country. Thank you. I want to thank some of my colleagues over here, Alma Adams from North Carolina, Congresswoman from Charlotte, Senators Malloy and Kempson, who have been up and down with me for the last 2 days. Thank you. My daughters, Jennifer, Angela, thank you all so much. They have been as emotional about this last week experience as any two people I know, and I thank them so much. They've become so much a part of me. As many of you know, I studied history, used to teach history. And I've said often to those students that I used to teach who would question, why did we spend so much time reading and studying and discussing those things that happened way back yonder? And I'll often say to them, we study history in order to understand the present. and to prepare for the future. Because anything that's happened before can happen again. And tonight, as I stand here, I am thinking about some of that history. Yes, sir. And I'm recalling something that's really attributed to a great Frenchman who came to this country to study our penal system and came to the conclusion that there was something magical about the United States of America. Now, in my research, I have not found that he actually said this or wrote this. But a lot of people give him credit for having said it. So if he didn't say it or didn't write it, then here's what you're getting from me. Alexis de Tocqueville is reputed to have said.
Brief interruption to say that NBC News has determined that Tom Steyer will not make the 15% threshold in the state of Carolina. But you see the Biden numbers at the top there, north of 50%. Back to Congressman Clyburn.
In American people. And he supposedly said that if Americans ever cease to be good, America will cease to be great. This campaign, this year, is about the goodness of America. And we have as our candidate a real good man. As I talk to people in trying to understand the voting patterns that were taking place and understand what many people were saying, it all bound down to one fact. People were confusing goodness as weakness. You do not have to be bombastic in order to get your point across. You don't have to call people names in order to have your positions understood. You don't have to tell falsehoods in order to make headlines about your proposals. We have as our candidate a man who understands what it's like to be an American. None of us have had the same experiences. All of us are but the sum total of our experiences. And all of our experiences have not been pleasant. But all of our experiences, in one form or another, have been blessings. And we are blessed with a candidate who understands what it is to restore the goodness that exists in this great country. He will get us away. And so, ladies and gentlemen, you really did not come here to hear me. And I did not come here to speak. I came here to introduce and present to you a good man. A man who understands the fundamentalist fairness upon which this democracy is built, a man who will restore the goodness of this business and take us to where this country can be. ladies and gentlemen, my good friend, one who I know, who you know, but most of all, who knows us.
Take nothing less than the supreme best. Do not obey, nor must you forsake, if you can pass the test. Just move on to a greater day. With just a little faith, if you put your mind to it, you can surely do it. Take nothing less than the supreme best. Do not obey, nor must you forsake, if you can pass the test. Just move on to a greater day. With just a little faith, if you put your mind to it, you can surely do it.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, South Carolina. And my buddy Jim Clyburn, you brought me back. It's a man of enormous integrity. For all of those who've been knocked down, counted out, left behind, this is your campaign. Just days ago, the press and the pundits had declared this candidacy dead. Now, thanks to all of you, the heart of the Democratic Party, we just won, and we've won big because of you. And we are very much alive. Look, I told you all that you could launch a candidacy. You launched Bill Clinton, Barack Obama to the presidency. Now you launched our campaign on the path to defeating Donald Trump. This campaign is taken off. So join us. Go to JoeBiden.com, sign up, volunteer, contribute if you can, but we need you, we want you, and there's a place for you in this campaign. Folks, as we celebrate tonight here in Columbia, let me talk directly to Democrats across America, especially those who will be voting on Super Tuesday. This is the moment to choose the path forward for our party. This is the moment, and it's arrived. Maybe sooner than anyone guessed it would, but it's here. And the decisions Democrats make all across America in the next few days will determine what this party stands for, what we believe, and what we'll get done. If Democrats nominate me, I believe we can beat Donald Trump. Keep Nancy Pelosi in the House of Representatives as Speaker and take back the United States Senate. So join us. My fellow Democrats across America, join us. If Democrats want to nominate someone who will build on Obamacare, not scrap it, take on the NRA and gun manufacturers, not protect them. Stand up and give the poor a fighting chance for the middle class get restored, not raise their taxes and keep the promises we make. Then join us. And if the Democrats want a nominee who's a Democrat, a lifelong Democrat, Democrat. An Obama-Biden Democrat. And join us. We have the option of winning big or losing big. That's the choice. We need to build on the coalition and legacy of the most successful president in our lifetime, Barack Obama. And the way we do this is by bringing Americans together of every race, ethnicity, gender, economic station, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, people of every stripe. Look, just like we did here in South Carolina. And like we can do across the entire country on Tuesday and beyond. Folks, win big or lose, that's the choice. Most Americans don't want the promise of revolution. They want more than promises. They want results. They want to give all Americans access to real opportunity, to be able to have affordable health care for all Americans, an environment with clean air and clean water, an education system that funds our schools, pays our teachers, makes community college free, a nation that will stand up to and beat the NRA. Reform our criminal justice system, root out institutional racism, mobilize the world against climate change. And an economy that works, rewards work, not just wealth. My dad used to say, Joey, a job's about a lot more than the paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about decency, it's respect. It's about your place in the community. It's being able to look your kid in the eye and say, honey, it's going to be okay. For all our families, for all our communities. Because that's the right thing to do. That's what makes us Democrats. Talk is cheap. False promises are deceptive. And talk about revolution and changing anyone's life. We need real changes right now. Something I've done my whole career, and I'll do as president. So this is an election to spend all our time in a battle for the soul of the Democratic Party. This is a battle for the soul of the United States of America. And we're in an incredibly perilous moment, as all of you know. Winning means uniting America, not sowing more division and anger. It means not only fighting, but healing the country. We have to beat Donald Trump and the Republican Party, but here's the deal. We can't become like them. We can't become like them. We can't have an ever-ending war. Above all, it's time for America to get back up. The country is so ready. So ready. Once again, fight for the proposition that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights. We say it all the time, but we've never fully lived up to it. But we've never before, until this president, walked away from it. And it's the reason why Jim and I and all of us are in this. I believe with every fiber of my being that all men and women are created equal. You know, I saw it a few days ago in a town hall in Charleston, Jim. I spoke with Reverend Anthony Thompson, whose wife, Myra, was studying the words of her Bible with 8 other parishioners at Mother Emanuel 4.5 years ago. It was a weekly routine, reading Scripture and finding purpose and faith in God and in each other. And in an instant, hate, vengeance, white supremacy pierced that faith, and they were lost forever. But you know what I found the most remarkable thing in my career thus far? Remarkable about Reverend Thompson and the families of the Emanuel 9. It's through all that pain, all that grief, they forgave. Yes, sir. Yes. And here's the deal. In their forgiveness, they brought more change to South Carolina than any that's occurred over the previous 100 years. Think about it. Think about it. The Confederate flag came down. Real change. That's why The Sunday after, Jill and I and my family, we came back to Mother Emanuel on Sunday services after the funeral of the victims. Because 6 weeks earlier, we had lost our son, Bo. And we needed to be healed, too. We need to be healed. I really mean this. We needed whatever they were exuding. And with every season that's passed, they've gotten up and found purpose to live life worthy of the ones they lost, worthy of the blessings to live in this remarkable country. We left here, having arrived in overwhelming pain, thinking we can do this. We can get through this. So I want to tell you, it's no small reason why I'm in this race. People like all of you here tonight, all around the country, the days of Donald Trump's divisiveness will soon be over. No. And as Jim, quoting to Tocqueville, he was right. This multi-ethnic country we call our democracy, America, it can't survive unless we focus on our goodness. We can build a more perfect union because the American people in the last 3.5 years have seen the alternative. No, I really mean it. Think about it. They've seen how utterly mean, selfish, lack of any sense of empathy or concern for anybody else. A president who not only has horrible policies, but the way he mocks and makes fun of other people. To all of you here in South Carolina, and especially Jim Clyburn, my friend, who lifted me and this campaign on his shoulders. That's right. But I mean all of you. Many I don't have time to name, all of you. We, Jill and I, our daughter Ashley, my son Hunter has been on the phone straight through for me. My brothers, my sisters, my 2 brothers, my sister, my 5 grandchildren, my 4 granddaughters who've come out on the campaign trail. We'll never forget what you've done for us. Well, we can say without fear of contradiction, the Bidens love you guys, man. The Bidens love you. That's real. And folks, now we need to stand behind Jamie Harrison, the next president of the United States, next senator of South Carolina. We need to send Joe Cunningham back to the House of Representatives. And all of us, all the Bidens, thank you. Thank you for everything, everything you've done for us. So, folks, so here's the deal. Let's get back up. We're decent, we're brave, we're resilient people. We can believe again. We're better than this moment. We're better than this president. So get up, take back our country. This is the United States of America. There's nothing beyond our capacity if we do it together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Curtis Mayfield singing him off stage as hugs from family members greet a man who is measurably a new Joe Biden, having won a huge victory in South Carolina tonight.
He picked a great night to give the speech of his life, too. We've been talking all night about how he doesn't have ads on the air. That speech or sound bites from it will be playing all over the news tomorrow morning when people wake up. I mean, he's peaking at the right time, as they say inside campaigns.
Well, and I thought the emotion, I mean, his emotion, you mentioned it, Brian, the ability to get the room raucous and loud and then to bring it down and to deliver that emotional message, to talk about how he came to South Carolina a few years knocked down at the death of his son. And there's no better story in campaigns than redemption, right? Okay. To come back from the political dead to ride again is triumphant. Now, the challenge she has is enjoy this for maybe the next 15 to 20 minutes.
Take your time.
Right. I'd be on a plane and I'd be at a black church in Tidewater before I accepted Terry McAuliffe's endorsement. You know, there's a lot of territory you got to cover in a very short period of time because he doesn't have the ads, he doesn't have the structure, but he has something that exceeds all of that tonight. He's got momentum.
He also has sharpened his message at the right time. I mean, I think you said from the other desk earlier that Bernie Sanders had one of the toughest weeks of his candidacy. That's because he's only been under fire by his opponents for 1 week of his candidacy. And you heard some sharp messages I'm guessing, tuned in for post-El Paso, traumatized Texas about the NRA, and a message about health care meant to speak directly to the moderate Democrats who are not looking for a revolution.
And the idea of if you're going to nominate somebody in the Democratic Party, nominate a Democrat. I mean, you heard all the greatest hits of what, if you're going to get to a two-person race, are the arguments that he's going to have to make against Sanders. Sanders will make arguments against him, but we have really fast-forwarded tonight into much further down the political road, right? This isn't just the fourth stop of the first four. We have joined this in a big national campaign and in a big way. And as we've been talking about, and campaigns get let off the hook by saying only 3% or only 4% have voted, we're going to pop up in 72 hours and a third of the delegates will have been picked in a big chunk coming up. They're all multiracial states, or a lot of them are. 75% of the delegates that we pick on Super Tuesday are going to be in states where the white vote will be probably 60% or less. Wow. That's why we're down to these two candidates right now, because they're the only ones that have demonstrated they can put together African Americans, Hispanics, and white voters.
And crucially, I think, in terms of the way that the Biden speech was constructed, carefully constructed speech designed to be on television. He did not start out with a big list of local officials he wanted to, thank and all those things.
I was so worried about that. We talked about that before. How do you use your moment? And he needs it more than anything. This is free media.
For him to end at the end, knowing that this is a speech for TV and it's the right length and all those things, to end by saying, and we need to get Jamie Harrison into the United States Senate, and we need to get Joe Cunningham back into the United States House. That was him, shouting out those elected officials and candidates, but that's him saying, down ballot Democrats need me. If you care about your U.S. Senate race in your state, if you care about the Pelosi majority in the 2018 elected House, that's him making that argument there. And that's an argument both to the political class and to voters who may be not sure who they want for their Democratic nominee.
And I think the Democratic base is as traumatized by Mitch McConnell as the Senate Majority Leader in some ways as they are by Donald Trump in the Oval Office. So it's also a message that has a lot of political potency.
And as we've maligned a little in the lead up to tonight, the campaign of Joe Biden and the performance of his candidacy, the speechwriting group is firing on all cylinders, and the candidate hit a home run tonight. Not just on that map that's covered all in blue, but taking advantage of that moment and using it. 72 hours from now, we'll be right back here, whole new set of ball games.
Yeah. Something else happened, and kind of uniquely appreciated by Joe Biden, who hasn't had a lot of these moments. He's wrapping up the speech, and a guy who I don't think was a plant, I think he was just a guy. It doesn't suck, forgive my French, when someone yells out, "We love you, Joe." And you're forced to interrupt and thank him and say the Bidens love South Carolina. Rachel, you and I have been looking across the studio at the map of South Carolina as the white has retreated and has been taken over by what has to be called tonight Biden blue. Steve, is he going to fill in this whole map?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was hearing some voices in my ear, and it wasn't yours. But, Brian, the scale.
If I had a dime for every time
you need to talk about it.
It's been that kind of year. So, the scale of what Biden is pulling off here tonight in South Carolina, we knew when we saw that exit poll that this was looking big for Joe Biden. It is bigger than it looked when we saw that exit poll. It is bigger than when we came on the air. Let me take you through a couple of different ways that is the case here. First of all, you see more than half of the vote is now in South Carolina, and Biden remains at 50%. Sanders still under 20% here statewide. We thought when the night began that would fall back into the 40s somewhere, that perhaps the absentee vote had artificially inflated Biden's support. It is holding steady around 50%. This is much bigger, certainly than the polls And even the exit polls were suggesting that's the scale of this victory statewide. Also, we talked about the turnout question. Was this going to be closer to 2016 when it was down at 370,000? Was this going to be closer to 2008 when it was well over 500,000? Right now, if you just extrapolate, if you take a look at what we're seeing in these different counties with more than half the vote in, you get a better sense of this. This thing is hovering around a pace of 500,000 in the turnout right now, significantly higher than 2016, lower than 2008, but not that much lower. That's the pace, you can say, with 55% in here. Again, you look at all the Biden blue. We said there were a couple counties here. Maybe Sanders would be able to make it close. Take a look where Clemson is. It's 6 points right there. We'll see there's still some more vote to come in. That's probably the closest Sanders is going to come on here. That's the closest Sanders is coming to keeping this math from being all blue. There's also, we say, the scale of this. There's also the question of delegates. 54 pledged delegates. Remember, coming into tonight, Joe Biden was in third place nationally in the delegates. It was Sanders, Buttigieg, and then Joe Biden. Take a look at what we've got so far out of South Carolina tonight. When I say the scale of this is bigger than we were talking about and thinking about earlier, this is more of what I mean. 28-4 right now. There are more delegates to be allocated here, but Biden is absolutely cleaning up in these delegates. What does this mean to the national delegate picture? Let me show you that. Look at this. Biden right now, with 22 more delegates yet to be allocated from South Carolina, has moved within 6 of Bernie Sanders here in the national delegate count. There was an assumption that, of course, Bernie Sanders was going to be leading, probably leading big in the national delegate count heading into Super Tuesday. Biden has pulled within 6. There are more delegates yet to be allocated in South Carolina. Likely, Sanders is going to start picking up some of those as we get assured that he hits thresholds in congressional districts. But Biden, there's a possibility he could eat into this a little bit more and be virtually tied with Sanders in the national delegate race heading into Super Tuesday. And one other metric that I just want to throw out there, I'm going to pull my computer up and take a look and see where it stands right now. We have been tracking what you could essentially call the national popular vote. Add up the votes. The first preference in the Iowa caucuses, the New Hampshire primary results, the first preference in the Nevada caucuses, and what you're seeing here in South Carolina tonight. I think I click on it. There it is. What you're seeing here in South Carolina, with just over half the vote in South Carolina, Joe Biden has moved within 7,500 votes of leading, of having the most votes cumulatively that any candidate has received. He's going to pass Bernie Sanders. He's going to have received, at the end of tonight, more popular votes from these first 4 contests than anybody else. And it won't even be that close.
And that's not projecting in terms of the total number of votes we're expecting from South Carolina. That's just with the half or so of the vote that we've got in now?
I mean, you can see this margin here is about 88,000, about 87,000 with 56% reporting. You are not seeing a lot of lag anywhere in this state geographically where Sanders is suddenly going to jump up. And Biden is on pace here. As long as he wins by a total of 7,500 the rest of the way, he's going to have the most votes nationally.
Fascinating. Wow. Fascinating. And that coupled with the fact that the national delegate race may essentially be coming to a tie as well tonight with this one state. I mean, it's a big deal.
It's something we talked about at the beginning of the night, that we sat here the night of the Iowa caucuses, and we could count, we could see, our reporters in the room could count the number of people caucusing. This was the biggest election that's been had to date, and it is, just a massive victory, a landslide by any analysis.
I mean, we'll see how it. We've got 56% of the vote in right now, and Biden's winning by a 31-point margin. If that holds, we don't know if it will. It's worth noting that that's larger than the margin by which Barack Obama won South Carolina in 2008, and he was not running in a 6- or 7-person field.
Well, I think it'll be interesting to watch is Sanders' number in 2020. How does it compare to what he got in 2016? In
terms of the total number of votes?
In terms of the raw vote, I think will be interesting to see whether, it gives a little test to this, are you growing the electorate any?
Yeah.
Because, granted, you've got a bunch more people in this race than just the 2-person race he was in, but you only got 26% of the vote in South Carolina 4 years ago.
For me, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, we don't casually throw around phrases like sweeping victory. But there it is. See the bottom. Biden on track for overwhelming win in South Carolina. The delegate total. I was about to take us to a break.
Oh, that's all right.
We're not going to do that.
Well, I think one thing that I think we're expecting is that I think we are going to hear from Pete Buttigieg tonight. We saw Warren started speaking in Houston, and then Bernie Sanders started speaking right after she started speaking, and then Joe Biden started speaking right after him. Amy Klobuchar and Mike Bloomberg are at the same Democratic Party event as sort of a dinner event tonight. But Mayor Pete Buttigieg is giving a full-on speech tonight, and that will start now.
Thank you, Raleigh. Thank you. Well, running for president is an exercise in hope and in humility, and we have come down south filled with both. We have come here asking for your vote, humbled by the knowledge that for so many, that vote was won through struggle, through blood, through sweat, through tears, and for some, within living memory. I am proud of the votes we earned, and I am determined to earn every vote on the road ahead. I want to salute all of our competitors, and I congratulate Vice President on his victory tonight in South Carolina. I want to thank the voters of South Carolina, especially black voters who showed that famous Southern hospitality over the last year, welcoming us into their homes and churches and neighborhoods and businesses. I want to thank our entire team, every supporter of this effort, and yes, everyone who has gone to Pete.
We're interrupting Mayor Pete Buttigieg with this announcement, breaking news that Tom Steyer is ending his quest for the presidency, ending his campaign tonight, having failed to reach the threshold in South Carolina voting and having bet the farm in many ways on the state of South Carolina. Back to Mayor Pete we go.
At this moment, as a mounting epidemic threatens our communities and our economy, we are seeing just how much it's going to matter to have serious judgment and a steady temperament in the Oval Office. Not to mention a belief in science and evidence. So more than ever, we know we cannot afford to get this wrong. We cannot afford 4 more years of Donald Trump in this country. And that means we cannot afford to succumb to the politics that have failed us. We can't go on with the politics that has us at each other's throats instead of having each other's backs. We can't go on with a politics that defines us by who we voted for in the past instead of what we can achieve together in the future. We know that the challenges of this moment, globalization, rippling through our economy in new ways, Americans are watching as the cost of housing and health care rise while wages can't keep pace. And with so much at stake, we must be prepared to meet these challenges of the future. Americans are crying out for a new kind of leadership, hungry to be united in a common purpose. And we know that if we are to tackle these challenges, we have to come together to write a new story for our future. So let's make this election about that future. And let's make it a future where every American belongs.
If just waiting for Steyer.
This is how we win. It's always how we've won. Democrats win when we offer a new vision, a new generation of leadership, calling our country to its highest values and its deepest ideals. Now, as a mayor who lives hundreds of miles away from Washington, in a middle-class neighborhood in a diverse city in the industrial Midwest, what I'm offering is a new approach in this election. I'm offering a nominee and a presidency where you could turn on the TV and actually feel your blood pressure go down instead of up through the roof. Wouldn't that be nice?
From Mayor Pete, we go to the news of the last couple of minutes. Correspondent Mike Memoli, who is covering as our embed the Biden effort, is the one who broke this news about Tom Steyer leaving the race tonight. Mike, what do you know?
Yeah, Brian. Well, from the thrill of victory here at the Biden campaign headquarters to the agony of defeat elsewhere, Tom Steyer, who initially passed on this race, saw the field develop, thought there was a chance for a billionaire who could spend his own money in it, running primarily on the message of climate and, of course, impeaching Donald Trump. Spent an awful lot of money in Nevada, an awful lot of money here in South Carolina. A very disappointing showing. He's about to take the stage elsewhere in South Carolina to announce that he is ending his campaign. $20 million, more than $20 million in this state, not just on the air, but also on the ground. This was, an effort that he thought could pay dividends, and clearly it hasn't. In part because perhaps the support was a mile wide and not necessarily as deep as it needed to be, but especially with the choice being crystallized for Democrats and the fear of a Bernie Sanders candidacy. The Biden perspective on this, of course, is that they hope that what happens with Tom Steyer is reflective of what might happen with Mike Bloomberg. As Biden himself often says, you can spend an awful lot of money on TV, but you can't erase your record. And in Steyer's case, he really doesn't have much of a record that Democrats are familiar with. So that's an important development for the Biden campaign, as they hope to see a real coalescing of the field around him, as you saw him in his speech tonight, trying to reframe this race as a difference between Bernie Sanders' vision of what the Democratic Party is and what Joe Biden's vision of the Democratic Party is. Joe Biden's vision having to do with, it may not surprise you, a family expression. As Joe Biden's father often told Joe Biden, that, I don't expect the government to solve all my problems, but I expect my government to understand my problems. They need to be authentic with the American people. His view that Bernie Sanders is not being authentic. He's promising a revolution, but not going to be able to deliver it. And the other thing I want to talk about in terms of Biden's speech, what we saw here tonight, I think we saw the Biden campaign trying to reintroduce, frankly, Joe Biden to the country. He opened his campaign presenting himself as the unassailable frontrunner, the Democrat who the rest of the party could get on his back in order to take on Donald Trump. Tonight we saw Joe Biden really returning to the very flawed, but very regular, very normal, very everyman Joe Biden, and a very emotional speech here. You saw him get emotional in his remarks tonight. As he put it, I've gotten knocked down in my life, and for all those who have done the same, this is your campaign.
Mike Memoli, thank you very much. The news tonight that Tom Steyer, after such an extraordinary expenditure, will be getting out of this race. And just to button this news, he had exposure of his own. He was on the air early. He introduced the notion of impeachment early for television viewers before they even knew anything about the guy, what he stood for. But having invested in the coal industry as a rich guy, having invested in the private prison industry as a rich guy, gave him these unintended exposures at debates and under attack that he had to fend off while trying to make the point that he was the best guy.
Although the defense that he had to pay, that he ultimately had to play when people did decide to finally go after him a little bit, I felt like was less determinative of the ultimate outcome for Tom Steyer than was the broader disinterest in him among Democratic voters. I mean, he did spend a lot. He spent an enormous amount for any normal human. For a billionaire, it was still kind of couch cushion money. But he went from being a climate-focused candidate to being an impeachment-focused candidate to being a South Carolina-focused candidate. And there wasn't any. I mean, South Carolina was the one place where he set roots deep enough and did more than 50 events and tried hard enough that he was going to do it. But money only. There's only so much that's for sale.
I think money. I think one of the things you can extrapolate about today's Democratic Party is a rejection of people trying to buy their votes. Bernie Sanders doesn't. I mean, he raises most of his money in small donations, and Joe Biden's broke. His campaign's broke, as we've been talking about. I mean, I think it's, you know, I don't know if it's cause and effect. I don't know if Steyer and Bloomberg's wealth is causing them to do badly in these early contests and in the polls, but it's not helping.
It's not helping, and one of the things I think is interesting, if you look at the public polling in the last week in this race, Steyer was as high as 20% in South Carolina. His vote didn't hold in Nevada. His vote didn't hold in South Carolina, and you wonder if it's easy to tell a pollster that a week from maybe now or a week ago, but you walk into that ballot place and you're saying, who's going to be the next president? And I wonder when Steve goes through those numbers in California where you've got people right on the cusp of being viable, does tonight put Biden ahead into that viability land?
There is Tom Steyer. Let's take the top of his remarks.
I got into this race for really, really good reasons. I got into this race because I thought that people weren't adequately addressing racial injustice in this country. And it's true. And it's true. And I thought that we were at risk as a country in terms of climate, and that expressed itself in terms of environmental injustice, and we've certainly seen that, and that's true. And that we live in a country that's deeply unjust economically, where rich people have been profiting at the expense of everybody else. And that's really true. And my family and I have been working on those things for decades. And I didn't get into this race and start talking about things to try and get votes. I was in this race to talk about things that I care the most about and that I continue to care the most about. And let me just say this, I think the team that we have, more than half people of color, more than half women, 30% LGBTQ, that is the team that I want to ride into battle with. That is the crew, that's the crew I want on my side. So let me say this, I've never worked with a better group of people who've worked harder or in a more dedicated way. The endorsers from South Carolina are some of, I want to say, some of the most outstanding human beings I've ever met, standing up for what's right. I am so proud to be with them. And the group of people in South Carolina, I'm looking at some of them right now, are a team of people who I mean, people use these words, but I am humbled to be working side by side with those guys. I'm humbled to be working side by some of the women from South Carolina. And honestly, the people who've endorsed me have stood up in a very red state where I have seen things, honestly, that have broken my heart. Because as much as I've loved the people here, and I've said, I'm not leaving. You may want me out of here. I'm not leaving. We're already figuring out ways, in fact, to make sure that we stay in South Carolina. And I have loved the people, and I feel as if their fight is my fight, and I want to make sure that's true going forward. But there's no question today that this campaign, we were disappointed with where we came out. I think we got 1 or 2 delegates from congressional districts, which I thank South Carolina for, and the people. But I said, if I didn't see a path to winning, that I'd suspend my campaign. And honestly, I can't see a path where I can win the presidency. So am I going to continue to work on every single one of these issues? Yes, of course I am, because I've never stopped. That's what I'm here for. And let me say, I kept trying to say this during the campaign, I'm a huge grassroots person. I'm a turnout, register, engaged turnout person, young people, black people, Latinos, people who are overlooked. Let's make sure their voices are heard, their votes are counted. And I promise I'm going to do that because I've been doing that. And let me say this, I, of course, will be supporting, I've said from the beginning, every Democrat is a million times better than Trump. Trump is a disaster. And let me say this. I mean, we're in South Carolina. Lindsey Graham's a disaster. He's a disaster for the people here. So, of course, I'll be working on that. And let me say one last thing. When the Lord closes a door, he opens a window. I will find that window and crawl through it with you. I promise you that. I love you very much. This has been a great experience. I have zero regrets. Meeting you and the rest of the American people is the highlight of my life. I love you right back. I love you right back. Thank you so much.
Tom Steyer has lost his quest for the presidency, but perhaps gained a new state of residency in South Carolina. So the Steyer effort is over. Over at the big board, Steve Kornacki has some news, and think of it this way. Bernie Sanders has campaigned low these many days and weeks, as he put it, as the winner of the popular vote thus far in the Democratic vote. Tonight's victory by Biden is so convincing that it has rewritten the storyline of this race thus far. Steve?
I think that's right, Brian. I think one way to look at what we've got right now is this is the end of the standalone contest phase. We go to the multi-state Super Tuesday in a couple days. We've completed the 4 standalone contests. And what can we say about the cumulative picture from those 4 states? You see, with more than 2/3 of the vote in, Biden is holding steady at 50% here in South Carolina. Very possible it is all going to be Biden blue here from up in the mountains down to the coast. Sanders far back at 19%. Our decision desk has allocated another delegate. Remember, 54 delegates up for grabs here in South Carolina. It's another Biden delegate. So in the national delegate picture, this is everything to date. Sanders right now, with more to come in South Carolina, 49, Biden 44. Biden is within 5. So for all of the problems Biden had in finishing 4th in Iowa, 5th in New Hampshire, an extremely distant 2nd in Nevada, he is coming out of these first 4 states, out of this standalone contest phase, almost even with Bernie Sanders in the national delegate hunt. The other thing is, you talk about the popular vote, we're tracking what was the cumulative vote from Iowa, from New Hampshire, from Nevada, and tonight from South Carolina. And again, with vote to still come in South Carolina, I'm just going to peek over at my spreadsheet here. Right now, Joe Biden has 14,000 more votes cumulatively than Bernie Sanders does in these contests. Biden has received a total right now of 236,000 votes nationally. 236,000 for Joe Biden, 222,000 for Bernie Sanders. And we just had another update there. And with every update we've been getting, this spread has been getting bigger, Brian.
All right. Thank you, Steve. And Mr. Pluff, I notice, is in our studio. Mr. Pluff, we asked you earlier how this rewrites the story. And now the question becomes more important. We have a new leader in the popular vote. Joe Biden has taken that state from the mountains to the sea.
Right. Well, it's a nice talking point, but the popular vote's irrelevant in terms of the nomination fight. It's a delegate fight. So as I said earlier tonight, this is now a 2-person race. I think there's no doubt about that. And Joe Biden was down to his last political life. He had an amazing night tonight, but his back is against the wall. He has to survive Super Tuesday. I think there's almost no chance Bernie Sanders doesn't net a significant amount of delegates coming out of Tuesday. So if Biden can keep that lead manageable, and by the way, there'll be some districts where if Bloomberg's getting delegates, that hurts Biden, and I think there'll be somewhere it helps him. But at the end of the day, he's got to survive it. So then when he goes on to Ohio and Georgia and Florida, April has states like New York and Pennsylvania, New Jersey in June. He's got to have Bernie Sanders in his sights so that delegate lead can't get too large. So the amazing thing is, after New Hampshire, I think most people are writing off Joe Biden. He has an amazing night tonight. I think the field is winnowed down in reality, down to 2 people who have a chance to be the Democratic nominee. And so now the challenge is, can Joe Biden get the kind of margins he got tonight in states like Alabama, in Tennessee, in North Carolina? 27 days from now is the state of Georgia, going to be a critical state before we get into April. So as much as it's a great night for Joe Biden, and he should relish it, it's the first primary he's won in his political career, his back is still against the wall. Bernie Sanders still has some distinct advantages in this race. And now tonight's speech was a really good start. It was probably the best speech of Joe Biden's campaign. It was short. It was pointed. As Nicole said, it drew great contrast. He's got to do that every day, every hour, to try and maximize this win tonight. And that'll be the challenge over the next 72 hours and really the next few weeks.
David, let me ask you to try to answer one of your own questions there. And you talked about the question of whether or not Biden can turn in this kind of performance, turn in these kinds of overwhelming margins of victory in other states. When he looks at other states in the South, other states that have large African-American proportions of the electorate going ahead, do you actually think that he can win those kind of margins in other states?
I think it's going to be hard on Tuesday. One, he's not been spending money in those states. Now, Bloomberg's on the ballot, so maybe sub in Steyer for Bloomberg. So the question is, if Bloomberg's getting 20%, Steyer did much less than that, that's going to be hard. And Biden does have a special relationship with South Carolina. He's spent an enormous amount of time down there. You had Jim Clyburn, probably the most important endorsement in the country in terms of how it relates to actual votes in a state. So I think it's going to be hard for him to win the other southern states on Tuesday by 30 points. But if he can win by 16, 18, 20, he's going to net enough delegates. And as we talked earlier in the night, California, California, California. If Bernie Sanders is the only one that's viable, he may have a lead that he'll never give up. And if Biden and or Bloomberg both can cross that delegate threshold, both statewide and in enough congressional districts, maybe Biden can keep Sanders in his sights and then win big enough later in March and April to make that delegate battle super close.
James Carville is back with us from New Orleans. And James, I'm so curious to hear if, in the time since we spoke to you, the scope of this victory has changed. It's become greater. As I said, from the hills to the sea, looks like it's going to be filled in each and every county in that Biden blue. And he has now taken the popular vote lead against Bernie. Has your strategy changed? Have your thoughts changed about what we've witnessed tonight?
I want every Democrat in the country to see what that looked like tonight. That is what winning looks like. That is the job of a political party, not utopian fantasies, but winning elections. And as Democrats go forward in this process, they have to be sure that they make decisions that, first and foremost, ensure that we're victorious in November. And I mean, in the presidency, in the Senate, in the House, in the governorships, in the state legislators all across this country. And to David's point, it's interesting because I have many vices, and gambling is one of them. In the gambling markets now, you have to bet 114 to win 100, that there's no winner on the first ballot when we get to Milwaukee. So we're going to be here a week from tonight in California, and everything's happening. This deck will get reshuffled again. But this, obviously, this really helps Joe Biden, but it gives Democrats a chance to see exactly what winning looks like.
James, if you were the Biden campaign right now, or honestly, if you were the Sanders campaign either, would you start looking at some of the other previous contenders who's been running? People like Cory Booker, people like Kamala Harris, people potentially even like Andrew Yang, other people who were part of this contest earlier, who left with a lot of goodwill, who weren't themselves going to be viable. Would you be trying to bring those people onto your team?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, everything is going to help a little bit to show that you can expand a coalition here. Also, I mean, it's inevitable that Senator Klobuchar and Mayor Pete will probably be out by Wednesday. It's kind of hard to see where there's a path there. So there's a lot of political groundwork that you can do that can help this. But these things happen in such fast time. You're just moving here, and they got, I don't know, 8, 10 states or something next Tuesday. Or 2 days from now. And it's kind of hard to accumulate all of that. So but let's see where we are Wednesday morning. But my guess is that Biden will do well in the states in the South, and Sanders will probably do well in California. And that 15% threshold in California is going to be really, really important, because this thing could, if you look at the percent, Biden got 50% of the vote, but he's going to end up with a lot more than 50% of the delegates. And David Plouffe is right. That's the thing that counts. So this is a really good night for Joe Biden, but we don't have very long before we have another really big night here, and we might be commenting on something differently. But just my message to Democrats is this: this is what winning looks like. This is what you want in November. You want to win.
James, it's Nicole. Did we gloss over your prediction that nobody will get to Milwaukee with enough delegates?
There's a thing called predicted. There's a betting market in politics, all right? There's like any vice I can find it. Yes.
Explain. I've got lots of vices, but betting on the presidential primaries.
So you can
tell me more. Tell me more.
You can bet online, and they set a price. All right. I was texted, it's 57 cents on a contested convention. So that translates into you would have to risk $114 to win 100. So it's almost a 60% chance, according to betting markets. Now, they change. They'll change tomorrow. They'll change next week. They'll change after California. But right now, they're showing that there's a better chance for no nominee on the first ballot than there is by some margin. So I thought that was interesting, and I think sometimes we get carried away with ourselves on election nights. It's like we did last Saturday. I mean, it established Bernie Sanders as the front runner, probably still a little bit, and I think Plouffe agrees with me. Still a little bit he's the front runner, so you can't take the foot off the accelerator here. You got to keep pushing ahead. This was a good night, but there's a lot of football left here.
James, it's Robert Gibbs. How are you?
I'm good, Robert.
War Eagle. I had to say that for all that LSU going.
23-20. Okay, go ahead.
What's your prediction? Is Bloomberg in this race next Wednesday?
Look, they're going to have to assess where they are. They're saying they're going to win 5 or 6 primaries, and as I told Nicole or Rachel, people in campaigns always say they're going to win. No one's ever thinks they're going to tell the press that they're going to lose a race. But if he runs third everywhere, he's a realistic guy. I mean, I don't know. He certainly doesn't have. Usually, the reason people drop out is because they run out of money. Well, this is not very likely. He could run between now and the end of this century and not run out of money. So I don't know. His position is I don't know what's the word, sui generis. I've never seen anything like this. So he's not dependent on fundraising, so he can say for a long time. Now, whether he wants to or not, I don't know. And maybe let's give him a chance. Maybe he'll do well in some of these states next Tuesday coming up.
James, try to limit your bets to LSU national.
I just Googled it. You got a new gambler here, James.
Come on, everybody get in on the vices with me. I got all these vices, but I just think it's interesting.
Thinking about it. I can't do it.
The pride of New Orleans, Louisiana, James Carville, thank you for always making us think.
Introducing more vices to MSNBC.
That's what Nicole needed.
That's redundant.
Saved it for Lent as well. Thanks. Cheers.
Yeah, during Lent, of all things. We're going to, believe it or not, we're going to take a break in the frivolity. When we come back, Steve Kornacki will look at this man's chances and preview the path of both of these men through the biggest contest 72 hours from now.